Welcome to the Non-Sequitur Show. Continual watching beyond this point may result in terminal face palming and a complete loss of wokeness. You have been warned.
All right, welcome to the Non-Sequitur Show. I apologize if I sound a little stuffy today. I've had some major allergy attacks in the last couple weeks, and they're pretty bad. And so I've been taking the stuff like candy. It's a XL3. It helps, but it certainly hasn't fixed the problem completely. So I'm going to try to get some more prescription stuff later on. But anyways, you're not here to hear my medical issues. We're talking about other medical issues actually today in some ways. So let me give you a little backstory on what we'll be talking about today. First, I ran a poll just recently. It was actually 9 days ago, and got 313 votes, which is actually pretty significant for these types of polls. And I had asked, what topic do you find to be the most volatile, controversial, most difficult to have civil conversation about without hyperbolic rhetoric from various sides of the argument? And out of the 313, 13% was gun control. Okay. 38% was abortion. Okay. 8% was other. But it was a whopping 41% for LGBTQ plus issues. And I got to tell you, I'm not surprised by that. I'm not surprised by that in the very least. Because recently, if people follow me on Twitter, there's been some very hyperbolic conversations going on with certain things dealing with the transgender communities. And so, whenever you start talking about these things, you're always going to have people from multiple sides weighing in. And I think that a lot of people have extreme views on all sides of the aisle. And so what I was hoping to do is have certain topics that we could discuss on the Non-Sequitur Show and maybe afterwards on my channel to a certain degree. With more of a midpoint kind of a view, which is I'm generally more of a centrist. I take more of a middle view on a lot of things. I don't think you have to be radicalized to have some kind of very specific standpoint in order to think critically. I think that a lot of things are complex topics. And I do think that the topic, especially when it comes to the LGBTQ plus communities and transgenderism, is very complicated. And so I was getting a lot of hyperbolic vitriol on my Twitter timeline because of the statements that I made, and I'm just not interested in that. I am not interested in people that want to bully their ways into a conversation or try to shut down a conversation. This channel has always been predicated on dealing with tough topics and talking about things that a lot of people may not want to talk about. But for those who do, they have the platform to do it. They're welcome to come on. They're welcome to talk about different topics. But I will not be engaging with anybody that has gone beyond civil dialogue to vitriolic rhetoric and just hyperbolic name calling when it comes to these sensitive topics. Now, somebody could argue, "Hey, Steve, you talk that all way. You talk that way to flat earthers all the time." I'm like, "Yes, well, flat earther, flat earth is not a sensitive subject, in my opinion. Obviously, I don't think that you have to be civil to a flat earther, And if you want to call me a hypocrite for that, I'm okay with that. I will take that criticism. I just don't think that it makes sense to put a flat Earth, which I think most of them are pose, on the same level as people that are suffering from things like gender dysphoria. What's that, Brandon? Yeah, and I'm glad that you said that because I'm wanting to find people that are up with me into a point. I want to see where the divergence starts to separate from a kind of a commonality between all sides, right? Because I think there's a discussion to be had, but once you start throwing in these grenades of hyperbolic language and everybody, is Hitler, everybody's Nazi, everybody's, evil bigot, I think that the dialogue is trying to be shut down that way rather than fostered. You agree? I do have the link to join. It is pinned if you want to join. I know Lady Firebrand was talking about joining us, so if Lady Firebrand wants to join, by all means. But let's kind of dive into the topic. So what kind of started this again, this kerfluffles that come around every year, it seems. I remember about 3 years ago, I guess it was now, when Rationality Rules had brought up the topic of transgenders and in sports, right? And instead of having a productive dialogue, that's when the first, well, I don't know if it was the first schism, but it was one of the first schisms in the ACA, the Atheist Community of Austin. There was other schisms involving Atheism Plus that was a complete failure, where they try to bring in very similar type of techniques on what's called repressive tolerance, where they think that anybody who isn't with them is against them. It was a black and white fallacy. Even people in the woke community back then who were arguing, if you don't agree with us, you're wrong, they have subsequently have changed many of their positions because they've realized that position doesn't make much sense, because there are people that do have some middle of the road views for very good reason. And so that either with us or against us stance doesn't always seem to apply. Anyways, welcome, John. You are audible. Make sure make sure the other people can hear you out there. I'm sorry. So anyways,
sorry, I'm borderline boomer, so I always just double check, make sure people can hear me before I start rabbiting on.
Yeah, the outside chat, make sure you can hear everybody just fine. Let's do a mic check real quick. We got Brandon in here. Hi, Brandon, again.
Hello.
And we have John in here, and I think that Lady Firebrand's going to join us soon. We also have Siggy Sigwald in the live chat, who is a new Patreon and initiate to join the membership. They became Patreon the other day and gifted 20 Non-Sequitur Show memberships. Wow, look at those green people that came up. Hopefully there's some people that have been around for a while. Thank you for that. That is awesome. And you know what's funny is Siggy and I don't even agree on this topic to a large extent, but I got to tell you, we can have civil dialogue. He did let me know that his English was not his first language, and that, to me, changed the entire dynamic of the conversation, because I think that a lot of these terms that we use when we talk about biology are very English-centric, and I think that a lot of times that people that do not have the same English as a primary language may not have the same connotations, and I think that's a huge factor to be had when we're talking about these issues. So thank you, Sigrid, for bringing that to my attention, and I think that after he did, it just totally changed the dynamic in our conversations, and they're much more productive, and even though we may disagree, I appreciate his input. So anyways, so on Twitter, if you guys remember, the second kerfuffle that came about was when Matt Dillahunty had Arden try to tell me who I can and cannot have on my channel, right? That was a kerfuffle going on on Tangelo, if you guys remember that. And basically, there's another schism that happened in the ACA. So recently, there's been another type of kerfuffle, and this is with a guy by the name of Michael Knowles. He was in CPAC. If you guys remember the statement that he made, but basically his statement was something along the lines that he wanted to eradicate transgenderism. I'm not going to play the clip. I don't think the clip needs to be played. If you want to go find the clip, you can go find the clip on Twitter. But basically,
well, you can put the link in the description.
I'll put. Yeah, you know what? That's a good idea. I'll put the link in the description. But during the CPAC, which is a conservative political action conference, I'll say what he said, quote, okay, because I do have the quote. He said, quote, "There can be no middle way in dealing with transgenderism. For the good of society, transgenderism must be eradicated from public life entirely." Okay, I weighed in on this because I do have some views on this. I am not, first of all, let me make it very clear. I am not a Republican. I'm not red-pilled. I am not alt-right. I haven't voted Republican since like Reagan. Okay, and even then, I don't think I think I don't even was old enough to vote for Reagan. But I did really like Reagan as a president. But Reagan Republican and modern Republicans are not even remotely the same thing. I'm not a fan of any modern republic or modern Republican, nor am I a big fan of many Democrats either. I tend to libertarianism or independence. So I definitely am not alt-right. I don't watch any of these people. I really couldn't care less about many of them. I find them to be just as vitriolic on the right as they are on the left. But when it came to this particular statement, a lot of people were saying that this was some call to genocide, which I believe is something that played right into his hands because he was looking to.
It's like shock media.
Well,
Like shock jocks, like Howard Stone. It's like shock media.
I don't know. I don't know if that's exactly what he's going for. I don't know. I don't think he has maybe the position, hey, look, we should go in and kill everybody that disagrees with us. I mean, there are people out there like Ken Hovind, Matt Powell, and Steven Anderson who literally believe that the government should go in and execute gay people.
Definitely, Steven. Yeah,
that's their belief. I mean,
I watched the
super bigot.
I watched the clip. I honestly, I mean, it's quite clear what he was referring to in the same way as he would want to eradicate communism because he's a free market conservative.
Yeah, he wasn't calling for people to die.
And I think, I interpret that as well. There was an argument to be had. And by the way, I took the same stance.
It's a social statement.
Yeah, I took the same stance as theoretical bullshit and secular outputs, I think it was. That what he said was bad enough. There was no reason to add into what he said in order to foster a greater and more hyperbolic rhetoric. And so there's no reason to say, oh, look, he was calling for genocide. There are people who out there literally calling for the death of these people. That is true. And they should be called out and they should be vilified. And I also believe that a lot of them should be mocked. I believe that mockery is a very good tool to defend against the people that are saying, oh, yeah, we should go kill people. I know that sounds odd because it's such a horrific thing to say. When you are advocating that the government should go in and kill people because of their sexuality, you're a morally detestable, reprehensible person. But at the same token, there is some mockery to be there because they're so stupid. And so I mock that their intelligence level is so low that they think that that is a actual argument that anybody should be having. It's not. It's no way should be, an argument. Real quick, Siggy Sigwalk for 90 ARS says, thank you for the honest discussion. You're welcome, Siggy. Appreciate you watching. Go ahead.
You can, obviously, I don't advocate for violence in any circumstances with the exception of self-defense. I don't think words are violence, but I think words can be used to instigate violence. I don't fully subscribe to the concept of sort of the stochastic terrorism. I still think a person is responsible. They have agency and they're responsible for their own actions. But you can create a hyperbolic environment where you can get sort of a frenzied situation with people. But I guess dependent on what somebody's sort of like their deontology is, they might have a set of sort of values that in their hierarchy of values that would justify violence against the transgender community from their specific set of values. And like a hardcore Christian, homosexuality is a sin attitude. You can understand, like, if you take on board those assumptions, and obviously they're not correct, I don't believe them, but if you take on board those assumptions, you can see how somebody can come to that conclusion. Well, it's wrong.
Obviously I know how they get to the conclusion, but it's so abysmal to me that it's so morally reprehensible that those people are just not good people. But let me ask you, do you think there's something called fighting words? I agree with you that, we should have the right to have self-defense, and that's another topic we're going to be talking about, gun control. And I'm a firm advocate of the Second Amendment, but I do also believe in things like background checks, and I do believe in firearm proficiencies and things of that nature, and some limited, I don't think anybody needs a high capacity mag kind of thing, Or
the firearms legislation in the UK,
like an assault weapons ban,
is absolutely absurd. I do small game hunting.
You don't need a high capacity magazine, AR-15, full auto.
Well, no. So for example, all of the stuff that I use are what are called pre-charged pneumatics. So they're powered by compressed air. Mm-hmm. So it's a bolt action. No, this is not airsoft. So it has you're sort of into the power.
No,
of
it's a high velocity. It goes.
Like
it's lethal.
It's a 2-2. It's a 2-2 alarm.
You could kill a deer with it.
You couldn't kill a deer with it. Well, I mean, I suppose you could.
But small
Yeah,
game.
It's small game. It's rabbits,
I mean,
pigeons, pheasants, that sort of stuff. Anything beyond that, you need a firearms certificate. It's bonkers. You've got a firearms liaison officer who wants to come around your house. They get your GP, your medical records. They interview your family.
You need a psychological exam, basically.
If you've got sort of diagnoses of anxiety, depression, if you're on antipsychotic medications, if you've had therapy, they want that information. They will come to your house and make sure that you have a gun safe bolted to a brick or a concrete wall.
Like I said, I'm not against a lot of that stuff. I do think that people should be psychologically not impaired.
We had a school shooting in 1996, I think it was. It was the Dunblane school shooting, where some lunatic went into a school with pistols and killed 16 children under the age of 6 and 2 school teachers, and the entire country just went, pistols are banned. Concealable weapons are banned. The only pistols you're allowed to own in the United Kingdom are things like muzzle loaders and those sort of relics, which are borderline antiques.
And
flintlocks and muzzle loaders and things like that. Yeah.
And well, we'll get into gun control another time, obviously.
Sorry,
but the whole thing.
I'm sorry, I thought guns were completely illegal in the UK.
No, you can have
no, not at all.
Yeah.
So
wow.
Yeah. But I mean, you want to fire a musket or a flintlock? That's even in the States, you can have certain other types of guns.
We've got a gun range down the road from my house. Yeah. They've got a 300-meter range. You can go down there. You can fire 308s. You can fire Lepers. It's all down to the. You cannot get a fully automatic weapon in the United Kingdom as a civilian.
But even a concealed carry,
you can't get full metal jacket ammunition. You can't get tungsten tip for that.
Yeah,
there's none of that sort of crap. It is exclusively around hunting and target shooting.
Yeah, no, I definitely think that those are some provisions that should be made. But in the United States, you have what's called fighting words. And fighting words are certain words that have been so used to be inflammatory that just the mere use of them could be considered to be somebody might be used force against self-defense.
Is this something that doesn't constitute the level of a direct threat of violence? Like if you walked into a pub and said to somebody, "I am going to stab you,"
correct,
that would be a legit. You would be justified in subduing that person proactively,
correct,
because they've made a direct threat.
Correct,
but it doesn't reach that standard. But it's getting there. It's close.
Right. But if you start using invectives or somebody start using racial epithets, and somebody knocks you out, they're probably not going to get convicted. And even though that I don't think words are violent, I don't. Violence is violence, but words to me are not violent. I understand that need or want or ability to be so, appalled by what somebody's saying to you that you want to knock them out. I get that. And I'm not going to even justify whether it's moral to do so or not. I don't think it's relevant. But there are something called fighting words. I am not a free speech absolutist to the degree where I think that all speech should be just free for all. I'm close. I'm very, very close. And many moral philosophers I know probably are full speech absolutists, and I understand why they are, and I don't begrudge them for it. I don't think it's a bad position. But when you have, like myself, for a fully almost close free speech absolutist, you're going to get the bad with the good, right? And when Michael Knowles is out there and he's saying these things, it is covered under free speech. It wasn't anything where considered to be fighting words. But one of the takes that people had on it, and this was an interesting take, and this is where I think the discussion should have gone had people not been so hyperbolic about it, saying, "Oh, they want to eliminate all transgenders." Well, he probably does. Look, Kent Hovind wants to eliminate all gay people. Okay, he's made it very clear. Now, he wants to do it by force. He literally wants the government to come in and step in and do it for him because he's a coward. Yep. Right?
Execution.
Yeah,
he wants a Ghanaian or an Iranian situation.
Yeah, I mean it's beyond sick, right? And
he's a theocrat, isn't he? So that's not surprising.
But what's so funny is you don't see a lot of people getting upset by that as much as you do with Knowles, what he said. And then one of the reasons why is that people don't take Kent seriously, right? They mock him. There's a degree of mockery. When Kent says stupid things about biology, people mock him. When he says stupid things about science, people mock him. When he says stupid things like the government should kill people, right? And I think that's a good defense. Mockery is a good defense against people like Hovind. You know, and I think the same thing could be applied to like Knowles. But one of the things that they brought up was that, look, if you eliminate transgenderism, you do eliminate transgenders. And it's like, well, yes and no, depending on what you mean. And I think that's where we should start, because if we were to eliminate things like, let's say we didn't eliminate all homosexuals, which I wouldn't know what that would mean. I don't think that's even something that could be physically possible. Statistically, if I remember correctly, maybe 8 to 12 people, or 8 to 12% are gay. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, Steve. Just when you say that to eliminate transgender people, did he not? Was his quote not to eliminate transgenderism
yes.
from public life?
Yes, he was talking about the ideology.
So yeah, but what I mean is when he says from public life, the way I interpreted that was the argument that we're having about transgender people in sports shouldn't be gone. The argument about transgender people in public bathrooms, or
and I think you're right too. He's talking
about being
about
transgender in your own home is an irrelevance. He didn't care.
I would agree with
that.
you. I would probably interpret that as well, because that's what he said, from public life. But the argument was made. Look, if there's no such thing as homosexuality, then nobody would be homosexual, right? It kind of follows, and I get that. But you're asking to do the impossible. It's not biologically possible. I mean, like I said, there's always going to be statistically some people in the world that are just gay. You can't just pray the gay away. It doesn't work like that. Gay people are gay. You live with it. And so I don't know what he expected to accomplish besides what you just said. And again, I'm not trying to justify his words. I'm not, what people are accusing me of doing, standing up for him. It's nothing like that. There's a discussion to be had. When he's talking about the public life, the whole conversation about bathrooms and transgenders in sports was, a lot of things in your face. Now, most people don't care where you go pee. I personally, when it came to the bathroom thing, I couldn't give a rat's ass. Go pee where you want to go pee. I couldn't care less. Well, but some people did, right?
Well, I mean, I'm actually one of those people that do up to a point, and it's actually got nothing to do with a sincere transgender person. A sincere transgender person, I don't think, is any more or less of a threat to women in women's spaces, biological women in women's spaces, than another woman is. Just because a sincere transgender male, so a biological male who identifies as a woman, if they're sincere, then they're not a risk. They're not a threat to a woman, because the majority of other women, from a sexual point of view, aren't a threat to other women. That's just the way our species seems to be. Seems to be that the vast majority of sexual violence is perpetrated by men against women, and we can understand from an evolutionary point of view why that is. It's not a mystery. It's horrible that it exists, but it's not a mystery. So my issue with the whole self-identification without there being any other sort of protections in place is that predatory men, I mean, some predatory women, very few, but typically predatory men, they will grab onto any lever, any gap, any hole in legislation or social etiquette that allows them to gain access to potential victims. And if you have just the only thing that protects women in their private spaces is the self-identification of a person who it's very difficult to challenge their sincerity on it. And it also becomes a taboo for women to complain about somebody who they perceive as not being sincere, or as a transgender person, or as being a threat, because they have no clue in the current environment whether they're the ones that are going to end up being castigated for raising a concern. And I think that's if we have women's biologically female protected spaces and they exist as a safeguarding measure, the reason they exist is to isolate them by their own choice from biological men who are statistically a much more likely threat to them from the perspective of physical violence and sex. If we don't have a way of enforcing that societally, then that safe space doesn't actually exist anymore, does it? Because a malevolent actor A dishonest person is going to lie in order to gain access.
Okay.
We have pedophiles that expressly join Catholic institutions and go through all of the hoops of becoming parts of the priesthood, and their intention is to gain access to potential victims. If they're going to do that, then, and if all they have to do to achieve the same access is just say, "Oh yeah, I'm a woman," and stick on a wig, then you've completely pierced that veil.
There's two parts. There's two parts to that, though, right? Two parts to that discussion. One, are we talking about, when we have these discussions, are we talking about people that actually are what they claim to be, people that have gender dysphoria, people that have under medical care that are in some ways either transitioning or don't identify with the gender they were assigned or things of that nature? Those we're going to call honest actors, honest agents. Those are the people that were who's going to be concerned about that, right? Nobody should. Now you're right, there are going to be dishonest agents, and that's a different part of the discussion to be had, right? Because when you're dealing with dishonest agents who are not going to play by the rules, which you're always going to have in any situation, you have psychopaths, and sociopaths, and pedals that are going to not play by the rules.
Yeah, we've got 1 to 3% of our population is psychopathic and sociopathic. We have to account for that.
And I agree. And so the question becomes, how do you accommodate the ones that are the honest actors and make sure that you safeguard from the dishonest ones? That should be the conversation to be had, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And that wasn't had.
That's the conversation I want to have.
Yeah, but that wasn't had in the transgender arguments back years ago when they were talking about this rationality rules, because they were shutting down the conversation. They didn't want to even have to deal with that.
Anybody who raises the concern that I've just raised, who doesn't want to have that conversation, will say to me that I'm accusing transgender people of being sex pests and predators.
Yeah.
I've distinctly divided, I've made a distinction between the two groups: predators, sincere transgender people. But this sort of notion that we've got you cannot question somebody's sincerity around whether they're transgender or not precludes you from having that investigation at all. It's bonkers.
Of course you can. And I don't like the idea that anybody can just go and dress differently and do gender expression differently, and all of a sudden they are the opposite sex, right? I don't think it works that way myself, but we'll get into that real quick. So Siggy for 900
Steve.
ARS says, trans women being inherently dangerous to cis women. We don't use the terms biological male or female. We're discussing gender. That's a dog whistle. It's very 2015 talking point in general, no longer relevant. It was a talking point in 2015. However, we do use the terms biological male and female because that's biology, right? And I think that's one of the reasons for the topic of the discussion is to differentiate between biology and bigotry. Bigotry to me is an irrational fear of something, and I don't mean fear as in like you're phobic, as in like, I'm fear of heights or something like that, but just a bias against, right? People that are bigoted are people like Ken Hovind, right? And Matt Powell and Steve and Anderson. These are rancid people, and they are very much bigoted, but there are biological factors, and those have to be, again, for the midpoint where we're at, the commonalities that we have to understand that there are different terminology to be used in different discourses. And in the biological context, and I have this discussion with, a biologist that Dan, if you guys know Dan, he's just saying, well, yeah, there is the male and the female of the species, but, you don't have to be male or female and blah, blah, blah. And, he wasn't really, talking about sex as much as he was gender, I thought, right? Because, when it comes to the human species, there's the male of the species and the female. Biologically, it's separated. Yeah. In angiosperms,
we're dimorphic.
We're dimorphic. Every human that ever lived, I believe, is either male or female. I believe this because it's biology. If I'm wrong on that and things have changed in biology, I've asked for evidence. I've never found any. I've never seen anything. I've read articles. I've read Nature. And I've read Claire's.
Even intersex people are either male or female.
And intersex is always, what I've read, is always been secondary sexual characteristics or primary. Something in the anatomy that's ambiguous, but they always have fallen into male or female. Correct?
Can we? I mean, just as a suggestion, Steve, can I just start at the ground up? And my understanding of the difference between biological male and biological female, preceding our understanding of genetics. Mm-hmm. So XY chromosomes, etc.
More
our understanding of male and but our understanding of what was in principle of a male entity and what was in principle a female entity. Mm-hmm. A female produces large immobile gametes, mm-hmm. and a male entity Yeah, exactly. The egg, and a male entity produces many small mobile gametes.
That's what
the
I
sperm.
learned when I took biology. Yes.
And they are now, but it is also the terminology used, from my understanding, is biologically in principle. And the reason that you have to have the biologically in principle is because then that also encapsulates those people who have ovaries, but there may be a problem with the ovaries, which means the person's infertile and they don't produce eggs. They, in principle, would if they were healthy. And it also encapsulates those people who are menopausal or infertile for another reason. If you have the testes, that is the organ that is in principle designed to produce the sperm, or if you have the ovaries, which are in principle designed to produce the ovum, whether they can actually produce them or not, that's what they are in principle designed to do.
That's called accidental properties, because you have it.
Yes.
If you look at essentialism,
that cuts the legs out from the argument of, oh well, what about people who are menopausal? What about people who are infertile? They're not really women. Well, you're just biologically illiterate, then, aren't you? I can't help you with that.
I think essentialism works in certain things, and so if you say that what's the essential feature for a female, it is the ability to at least theoretically produce eggs. Obviously, there's what's called accidental properties, but it's the same thing when you categorize, humans as chemoheterotropic, and you categorize them as two-legged,
bipedal.
Bipedal. If they're born without legs, they're still humans, right? It's just an accidental property. Yeah. And so
humans have 10 fingers. Just because a person can be born with pterodactyl or something doesn't mean that humans don't have 10 fingers. You have
11 fingers, you're still human. These are accidental properties. And so, I think, the whole thing when people are saying, okay, when you have somebody who's transitioning from born biological male, and whether they're assigned at birth, or let's say they, like you and I, would be considered biological males. There's nothing about us biologically that is any constitutive of female. I don't have a uterus. I don't have fallopian tubes. I have nothing that would be ever even anatomically or even expression female. I think hopefully most people would agree with that. If you don't, that's fine too. I'm not offended. But the whole point of transgender is I would think that be recognizing that you were born one sex, but you express differently. That's why it's transgender. That's why they're people that are trans women, they, to me, would have to recognize that they're born male, but they are expressed as female. And I think
you have to recognize that, otherwise the prefix transgender is fucking meaningless.
I would think so too, but I mean, people are telling me that for some reason that's not kind of how it works, and I'm thinking, okay, well then explain it to me, because this gender dysphoria is the fact that you're not comfortable with the sex that you either were assigned, or, like, for example, if I felt like I was female, I'm not comfortable with that. And that does happen, right? It is a psychological condition. I'm not disagreeing with that. But, for them not to recognize that there's two fundamental biological classifications for the human species, I never understood that, because I think they're losing the people that are going, okay, explain to us how you're no longer either male or female, because none of the people that I've talked to that are in the centrist kind of position understand that, because when you go read the literature, it still says biological sex has male and female. Everything I've ever read says this. Everything literally says this.
If you don't concede, if you don't concede the biological fact that we're a dimorphic species that are fundamentally divided into two categories, male and female, then you may as well cut the legs out of every single last stitch of modern medicine. Because if there isn't these two categories of biology that we understand, the entirety of every single mammalian species and almost every other species falls into,
correct,
including plants, for God's sake, then you have literally just cut the legs out of almost every last single thing that we have been using to manipulate biology for the last 600 years.
Yeah, Siggy points this out.
And longer.
Yeah, Siggy points this out, and I think there's something to be said here. Excuse me. 450 ARS, he says, if we're using terms like biological male and female, then we're talking about sex, not gender. This is very specific terms, and mixing them up is causing confusion. And I agree, but here's the thing. Up to recently, gender and sex used to be synonymous. They used to be something where you could literally change one or the other, and they would mean the same thing. In other words, if you had a proposition that used one word, you can substitute the other word, and it was transparent. It didn't change the truth value of the proposition. And you'd have a gender reveal, right? Gender reveals, boy or girl. But recently, hang on one second, in more modern usages, gender has been separated from sex and used differently. And I have no problem with that. I really don't.
No, absolutely.
Yeah. And so
that's utility. I agree. Yeah.
Utility. Yeah, absolutely. If you find it, if we have found over the last how many decades that there was a utility to use the word gender in a different way than sex, because how people express themselves, because of social conventions, social norms, and things of that nature. And so, yes, it makes sense to me to differentiate. And so when people say there's only two genders, well, yes and no, again, depending on your model. Because in a bimodal distribution, you still only have two modes, male and female, and then everything is in some kind of somewhere along the lines of the distribution. Either you're 100% female, 0 male, or you're somewhere near 50-50. It's impossible on a bimodal distribution to be 100% male and 100% female. I've heard people say, "Oh, I'm 100% male, 100% female." Show me on a graph how that works, because on bimodal it's impossible. But you could be non-binary. You could be somewhere in the middle and don't really affiliate with male and female. Okay, I'm fine with that. That's gender expression. But I think what happens is when they start arguing biological sex, then you have people that are going on the right, picking that up, and they're using that to weaponize, against transgenders, because they're going to say, "Oh, well, now you've crossed just from gender in order to sex, you can't change your biological sex," which I agree with.
So,
right?
It seems like the chronology of what happened was we started off with gender being synonymous with sex, and we started seeing gender on forms and things because it was considered slightly more polite than having sex on a form. That's to me, that seems to be where the word originated. It's like, passports, driving licenses, it's a gender. Forms say gender instead of sex. It seemed to be almost like a slightly prudish politeness thing. So they were synonymous. And then at some point in the last few decades, because of utility, the sort of the not the decision, but just by virtue of it having a utility to it, we've gone, right, okay, gender is somebody's self-expressed. It's a proactive expression of how they want to conduct themselves in the world, and how they would like the rest of the world to perceive them in terms of the role that they fulfill within society. And that initially seemed to be, okay, I might be a biological male, but I would like to perform or fulfill the role of a woman, of a female. Mm-hmm. And I acknowledge that I can't be that thing in terms of the biology, but I can still perform 95% of the role or the social, and follow the social etiquette that sex typically would have followed. Completely agree with you. And so we're in the situation where society, for the most part, has accepted that somebody can be one biological sex, but they can choose to identify with the gender role of the opposing biological sex. Mm-hmm. So you can essentially self-determine your gender role, but you can't self-determine your sex. And now we've come full circle where people are going, well, actually, if you can self-determine your gender, we're actually now going to say that we're going to re-amalgamate gender and sex to mean the same thing, which means logically you can now determine your sex, which is not the fucking case.
Yeah, but that's the semantic substitution they do, right? They go down the path of acknowledging, if for utility reasons, a differentiation between sex and gender. But then they'll try to combine them again and say, well, you can't change your sex. And they're meaning it to be gender, which is, again, equivocation. And people are talking about the bathrooms. I don't know if, a lot of people remember growing up, but didn't you ever have to, have your sister go to the men's bathroom, or your mom had to go to your men's bathroom, and you kind of watch, because, when a woman's got to pee, they got to pee, right? And they don't care. They'll use whatever bathroom's available to them, but you generally stand outside the door for them, right? You ever had to do that?
I have a 4-year-old son and I have a 7-year-old daughter. And only the other day, my daughter, she does gymnastics, and she was wearing a leotard. It's awkward. She had multiple layers on because we were about to go out in the cold. She said, "Oh, I need the loo." And I was like, "Oh, well, can you hold it until we get home? It's about a 10-minute drive." And she was like, no, I really can't. I was like, right, okay. So I'm looking at the female toilet door, and I'm looking at the male toilet door. I'm like, right.
Female's line's always longer.
We just took her into the cubicle, and it was fine. And vice versa with my wife. Well, my wife's with my son, and my son's 4, so he doesn't go in. Isla could maybe go into a bathroom on her own, and if she wasn't wearing this awkward leotard and 400 layers because it was cold, I probably would have just sent her into the women's bathroom. She just had jogging bottoms on or something. Mm-hmm. but my son, and that's obviously understood. It
Sure.
is not. It's not considered socially acceptable for me as a biological male who identifies as a man, even with my daughter, to go into the girls' bathroom.
But isn't that a social norm?
Of course, it's a social.
Yeah.
Of course, it's a social norm. I would even if I was going in that bathroom with my daughter, if there was another woman in there and I walked in there with my daughter to take her to the bathroom, they could see what was going on. They could see why I was in there. I would rightly expect them to be pissed and tell me to get out.
Not necessarily. I mean, I think a lot of people are understanding, and I think people have this weird misconception. I think that social norms are all bad. No, there are some good social norms and some bad social norms. Norm doesn't mean that it's good. It doesn't mean how it ought to be. It just means that this is how it is generally is understood in society, and some societies think things differently. There's a lot of countries where you have very co-ed bathrooms. I mean, people don't care. You'll be taking a dump next to some a female. It doesn't matter. They don't care. They don't have the same stigmatism as some Americans do.
If you want to have a room with urinals in it, and a room with cubicles with toilets where the doors go to floor and ceiling and they're sealed units, and that's how we want to build our architecture going forwards, don't care.
Yeah,
doesn't bother me. That's fine. I consider that to be a situation. Obviously, you can't expect all businesses to assume the cost of retrofitting their buildings. But if that's the way you want to build our architecture going forward, if that's the process you want to get, that's fine by me.
Generally speaking, at least in California, generally speaking, new buildings are generally making they have female, male, and they have a unisex bathroom. And there's also the handicap bathroom because it's easier to just make one bathroom that is ADA compatible for wheelchair accessibility, and that people that don't want to use either bathroom can use. And I'm all for that. I think that's absolutely the way to go. But unfortunately, you can't retrofit older buildings that way. So that doesn't necessarily apply to buildings that only have male and female bathroom. You're not required by law to go in and make a third one.
Well, I don't know if you had it in the States, but we had, I can't remember which university it was in, actually. It was a UK university, but that's exactly what they did. They essentially took all of their disabled bathrooms, or all of their whatever the PC term is these days, essentially the disabled bathrooms, and they had the disabled sticker on the door, and then they slapped another sticker on the door, which was essentially unisex. And then the transgender community complained that they weren't disabled, and then the disabled community complained that, well, why would it be a bad thing if you were disabled? What's wrong with disabled people? So they managed to fucking offend everybody.
Right. And that's one of the problems I see in the woke community. There's something called intersectionality, which has been around a very long time. Back in my day, it was called multiculturalism, and today they call it critical race theory. And there's a relationship between all these different theories: standpoint theory, critical race theory. And I have people on the internet going, "You don't know about critical race theory?" Okay, well, we're going to have a discussion on critical race theory one time, and hopefully you've read some of the things that I've read on critical race theory. But to have the discussion on, because I think it's something that should have a discussion. But when it came to intersectionality, it was persecution versus privilege. It was the whole premise of what class has more persecution. In this case, it was disabled against a transgender. They're vying for position. And rather than just going, hey, yeah, we both can use this, right? Because
the comedic term that's been given is the intersectional Olympics, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly, and that's exactly what it was, the intersectional Olympics, because people were vying for position on who is persecuting more. That's exactly what it was. That's why they coined that phrase. And you don't hear a lot of things about, you don't hear intersectionality a lot these days. You don't hear multiculturalism. Back in my day, multiculturalism was a big thing, and there were certain reasons for it, just like there were certain reasons for affirmative action. But you don't see it a lot now in 2023. How often do you hear about affirmative action programs or multiculturalism in schools? You really don't. It served its purpose, but good.
And I have such mixed feelings on what we determined as positive discrimination.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't have positive discrimination in one direction without having negative discrimination in the other. It's definitionally impossible.
For everything, with every group that's discriminated, there's some group that has an advantage. It's just
exactly.
It's a zero-sum game when it comes to that.
Yeah, you've only got to look at it with the lawsuits that have been brought against Harvard at the moment by the Asian students. I mean, and are they justifiably aggrieved?
It's so funny you mentioned that, and I hate to get a little off topic, but this is worth exploring. It's so funny because when it comes to the Harvard situation, the Asians feel like they're the outcasts and they're the minorities that the Civil Rights Act, the critical race theory advocates don't want to talk about. They're the minority that just they can't fit in anywhere, because the whole thing on critical race theory is predicated that the systemic racism is so ingrained in our laws that there's just no getting away from it. It's not based any longer on Martin Luther King's view that racism comes from a position of bias and that people can change the hearts and minds of people. That's how it was when I was growing up. Racism is bad because you have a bias against somebody, and by changing the minds of people, which can work, it has worked. People have less racist. KKK, but changing their minds. But hang on, but the critical race theorist says that's not, no, it's not like that any longer. It is systematically ingrained in the system. But then the Asians go, well, hey, wait a minute. How are we succeeding in America? We're a minority that's been persecuted as well, but we're doing pretty well. How is that possible that you're not,
So we had a report in the UK recently, which the mainstream media or the legacy media almost completely ignored, except to report it in the negative. Now, the institutions that were responsible for producing the report were incredibly careful with who they had in charge of producing the report. It was a panel of almost exclusively minority represented people. The idea behind this being to try and cut the legs out of any criticism of, it's a bunch of old white men that have produced a report that's in their favor. Now, the report ended up showing that the specific part of the report that was covered the most was about educational attainment for different ethnic groups. I think because it was probably one of the easiest things to quantify, because it just is. You look at the ethnic origins of the person concerned, and then you look at their test scores. It's not difficult. And children boys from the West Indies were the worst performing in the group. Girls from the West Indies did slightly better, but girls tend to do slightly better with their compatriots from the same ethnic group across all categories anyway. White UK born did slightly better than the West Indies, and almost every other racial group did better than the whites and the West Indies. So the argument was made by a lot of these minority individuals who were responsible for the production of the report were saying, well, hang on a minute, like this white privilege that we're talking about seems to be unusually targeted against white people and West Indian people, and seems to be blind when it comes to all of these other ethnic groups being sort of like the Pakistani, Asian, all of the other different groups. Sort of like your paradigm, what you're saying about this social phenomenon that is white privilege or doesn't seem to be why is it targeting this one group, which is considered a minority? The host nation's most numerous group is only doing majority slightly better than the worst, and then you've got all of these other minorities which are massively outperforming.
Correct. I think there's a reason for that. Okay, so I do believe there is some kind of inherent white privilege. I do think it exists, but I think that people take that sliver and run with it to an extreme, and that's unfortunate. But I do think there's an inherent bias in the legal system and in police officers, and there has been since the Jim Crow days. When Jim Crow's when those laws got repealed, I do believe it probably was for the benefit, or they thought it was a benefit for the white people. It wasn't to help the minority. I don't think they gave a shit. I do believe that it was just convenient for them at the time. But the critical race theorists, at the time, were wondering why the movement was kind of slowing down. And if you actually read Delgado, he's a legal scholar from Seattle, Richard Delgado, and he noticed though that the top 20 papers written, back, I believe this was in the 70s or 80s, I can't remember the decade, but he looked at the top 20 papers. And they were all, the most cited were white people, white males, all of them.
It was like 18 out of the 20 were the most cited.
Yeah, exactly. 18 out of the 20. And and so he thought to himself, look, there's a much more systemic thing to be had. And that's true. I think there is some systemic. But again, when we talk about critical race theory, in a future episode, I do want to do the same thing. Find the middle point. Or the midpoint, and kind of go from there of where people agree and disagree. Because I have people telling me that critical race theory is objectively true, and I'm like, I don't think you understand what the hell that means then, because it's a nonsensical statement. But to get back on topic with the transgenderism, isn't that the same thing when they say you're wrong by fiat? Oh, this is true by fiat, or this is true objectively, and then when you look at the facts, you don't find that to be the case. So to me, if I want to get back to the facts of the matter, talking about transgenderism, do we all agree that for this species, Homo sapiens, there's the male and the female biologically a species? If you can't get that far, I don't know where else in the conversation you can go. But
it's funny. I was telling, there's a very old school friend of mine who I work with my business, and I was telling him that I was going to be having this conversation this evening, and I was kind of looking forward to it.
Yeah, me too. I didn't mean to postpone it. Work has been
my
days off, and by the way, the link is to join is in the above. I pinned the link to the live chat, so I know that Lady Fire Brand wanted to join, and some other people that have been talking to me about it, going, yeah, we'll be there. If you want to join, you can come on in. Go ahead.
How many people can you host at the same time? Was it like 6 or
six,
something?
I believe.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So what I was saying earlier today was that I was kind of wanting to approach this from the perspective of reasonableness, and in my opinion, if I was having this conversation with an interlocutor, what positions they would have to concede for me to consider them to be a reasonable interlocutor.
I think that's a great way to start.
I literally have notes. My very first one on the list is acceptance of biology and humans as a dimorphic species.
I think
that's my first one on the list.
I think that's a great way to start, and let's put it to the audience, because again, I'm going to be having conversations from the midpoint. I like. There's actually a podcast called The Midpoint. I was going to start something like the Midpoint Show, but Sony's already done it, so I just want to go from I'm not calling it the midpoint, but just midpoint.
You should call it the reasonable middle or something.
Synonymous. I was thinking about the middle zone. The fence sitter. There's a whole bunch of things you can call it. But yeah. I think the concept is, where's the midpoint where people start to diverge between, what we would all reasonably agree would be the case, to where you get to do more left, more right, and then more radical left, more radical right. And so anybody in the live chat, do they disagree that humans are a dimorphic species, as far as you have the male that produces the spermatozoa, the smaller gametes, and you have the female that produces the larger ovum, regardless of accidental properties? Again, most of the time when you have somebody who's intersex, that's due to developmental disorders. That's some kind of anatomical issue, right? They're born with different sex organs that would be characteristic of more of the female or the male, but they're not related necessarily to chromosomes or to the karyotype or the SRY gene.
I mean, I'm probably going to butcher the biology of this, because it's something that I'm not a biologist, but there's something, I don't know what the medical term for it, but I think colloquially it's called pseudohermaphroditism. Mm-hmm. And it's where typically a person who appears to be female is actually a biological male,
right?
And in utero they have an unusual resistance to the testosterone hormone, which means that the testes don't descend into their normal position. They actually stay in the position of where ovaries would be, mm-hmm. And then that person develops externally typically female characteristics, because the estrogen is unusually prevalent, has more of an effect than the testosterone would. So they're producing testosterone, their mother is producing testosterone, the testosterone is passed to them, but essentially because they're impervious to it, the estrogen takes over and is the driving hormone. And those people are usually only discovered to be the opposing sex that they actually thought themselves to be at the point at which you would expect them to start undergoing puberty or start trying to have children, because they're infertile. Now, under that, an intersex person like that, that is a prime candidate for a person where you'd go, okay, this is what we found. There would be the most perfect of passing essentially accidental transgender people on the planet, because they almost have a perfect external female characteristic.
But those are primary sexual characteristics. Those are what's called DSD, differences in sexual development, right?
Yeah.
The type of difference you're talking about is androgen insensitivity.
Androgen insensitivity.
Right. Yeah. Androgen and testosterone is an androgen. So when you're insensitive to you don't have the receptors for testosterone. Again, I'm not a biologist either, but we've all looked into this stuff. When you don't have the receptors, or you're just not able to have testosterone start the developmental process of differentiation, then yes, your phenotype is going to be much more female, but you can never produce ovum.
You can't.
Right.
You are biologically male,
and that's the big thing, right? That because you're biologically male, but you're going to present phenotypically female, right? Because
almost perfectly.
Your genitals.
Yeah,
I mean, there's a House episode when House had that very same situation, and he had actually said,
I remember that. She was actually
the most perfect woman happens to be a man, right?
Well, they actually nailed the point a little bit too hard because she was basically like a supermodel, wasn't she?
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And so, those are developmental issues, and so when you're, to me, every developmental issue that I've looked into, I've had people send me papers all the time. I've looked at them. I say, okay, but this person, this is Klinefelter's disease. Okay, Klinefelter's is still only affects males. Now, there is a rare instances where you can have a karyotype for Klinefelter's that might be a female phenotype, but it's still genetically male, or there's some kind of mosaicism. But every paper that I read still said basically that this is somebody who is this karyotype or genotype, but it presents phenotypically different, but is never once had a case of true hermaphroditism where the single person produced both gametes. Never. It would be interesting if it did. Maybe we would have a third sex then. I don't know.
Obviously, I have to caveat this with as far as we're aware, there has never been an intersex person who's in principle been able. There is in principle.
It's always one or the other, and either. Themselves. Right. Yeah.
They've never been able, in principle, be able to fertilize themselves. Now that's never existed as far as we know.
It is interesting to note, though, if you did have a member of the species that could produce and self-fertilize, would that be a third species, a third sex? It probably would. Now, there is something called parthenogenesis, but it's not quite the same thing. And a female human technically can have parthenogenesis, but it's never viable. It can never come to term, and it usually is a spontaneous abortion. But
parthenogenesis exists in. I mean, it exists in species of insects. It exists in some species of fish.
And humans too, though. It can happen. But it would always be male and be not viable.
As a viable procreative strategy. It
would always be female. I'm sorry. It would always be female. Because if people would say, well, Jesus was due to parthenogenesis, I'm like, well, Jesus would be a girl then. But anyways, so let me ask the audience, does anybody out there disagree so far about when we come to biological sex, that there's literally just two distinct, mutually exclusive and jointly exhaustive.
Careful, don't say genders.
No, mutually exclusive and jointly exhaustive sets. I do have a reference here. This is from the National Library of Medicine. It says it's called Only Two Sex Forms but Multiple Gender Variants, How to Explain, and it's very clear. It says, thus with respect to biological sex, one is either male or female. It's very clear on that, and everything I found doesn't negate that. So I think that's a good starting point to be had, and then see where people diverge from.
Yeah. I mean, the list that I ended up with. I mean,
okay, what's number 2? Because I don't see somebody outside disagreeing with that.
A person is a product of their biology and their environment.
Nature versus nurture.
It's an amalgamation of the two. The degree to which it's an amalgamation of the two can be argued, but it is an amalgamation of the two. It's not. There is no aspect of what there is. I don't believe there is any aspect of what makes you that is 100% driven by the genetics, or is 100% driven by your environment. It's even your height is partially driven by your environment, because it's affected by your nutrition.
Yeah, no, I think there's a huge thing to be said on nature versus nurture. I did a poll, and I think that both of them have very strong interplay with each other. If my nurture was different from my upbringing, I could have a completely different view on things. Of course. And I do think that most of the time it is biological, as far as like either hormonal or genetics or some factor. I don't think that people really turn gay environmentally. Can happen, but it's very rare. But I do think that most people are literally born gay or transgender.
Again, I'm not convinced of that. I don't think that's the case. I think you could have a very, very, it might be 90%, 10%. It might be.
Oh yeah, no, I'm not saying every case. That's why I said, that's why I qualify that. I said in most cases.
Yeah. But I think, and ultimately all psychological states are physical states. If you have an experience in your life that affects you psychologically, well, the experience in your life provides you an experience, a memory that you recall later in your life that causes neuronal connections in your brain, and neurons are physical things. All psychological states are physical states. So in a very real sense,
if you're a physical reductionist,
yeah, but I mean, all experiences that you have ultimately will have an impact on the molecules, the atoms that make you, and that will color your perceptions of future interactions.
Do you agree that when people when they're born, because of hormonal imbalances or some kind of let's say they did have androgen sensitivity syndrome, something like that, it's going to affect them mentally as well.
Yeah, of course.
So I do think that we're more hardwired for a biological sexual interest than nurture. But can it be through nurturing? Sure, absolutely. But I do think that I think the primary though is through nature, and I do think that people generally they're just going to be born gay. I think statistically, again, 8 to 11, 12% of the population. It doesn't seem to change much, and if it's all nurture, it would obviously change a lot more.
The reason that the biggest thing that jumped out to me when I put that down on the paper, and the thing that I was thinking about is, okay, so young children who have been the victim of sexual abuse, have a much higher probability of becoming sexual abusers in the future than the rest of the population. It's not fair. It's not right. I consider those people who have been victims of sexual abuse and become sexual abusers in the future to be in part victims themselves. Mm-hmm. But they were not born inherently to be sexual abusers. Mm-hmm. That is, they are statistically more likely to become sexual abusers because of their environment.
Right, and also they were going to have probably different sexual interest.
And sexual abuse of minors, whether we like it or not, is a sexual proclivity.
Yeah, and I think that's from a lot of its environment. That's different. That's a completely.
But what I mean is, if that can be impacted by environment, then what's to say that other sexual proclivities can't be impacted?
Oh, absolutely. No, that's what I'm saying. That's why it's not. It's not all inclusive.
Stuff that's sinister, stuff that's not, stuff that's completely innocent. We are humans. People. We're impressionable. Some people are like wet clay, and some people are a bit more robust. They're a bit tougher, and they're less impressionable. It's plasticity,
yeah. But I think the point being is you agree that the primary is more nature, at least on the average.
I don't see how it couldn't be because of how we've evolved.
Yeah, and that's okay. So we're actually on the same page. Siggy for 225 ARS says environmental factor also influences. We're also influenced which sex you are. Or sex you will be, if I remember correctly. Yes, I mean, to a point, again, we're not talking about sex. I think you're talking about gender there, right? Because environmental factors can affect gender unless there's going to be some kind of developmental issue, right? If you have some kind of environmental effect that affects the proper development of of sex, that's a DSD issue, right?
Yeah, so, I mean.
That would be something along the lines of a
as much as there are some aspects, as much as there are aspects of your biology that can be affected by your environment. Accidentally having a finger cut off was an environmental factor, and that has literally nothing to do with your biology. But I was thinking more in terms of how your environment affects your psychology or your proclivities or your potential behaviors. But I mean, there is even aspects of your biology, like I said, nutrition with height, but if you were born with pterodactyl, which is a deformation in the hands where like you can get symmetrical pterodactyl, which is where this part of your hand doesn't form. So you've essentially got two sets of two fingers. You've still got the same number of fingers. It's fascinating to see. I think it's quite cool, to be honest.
Before we get to your next on the list, let me get Psychopath Atheist in here, and then I got some Twitter stuff that I want to show before I forget. But Psychopath, what up, man? It's been a while.
It was going on, Steve. How are you?
I'm not dragging up old stuff, and I really don't care, to be honest with you. But I thought you loathed me, by the way, because. By the way, I've never had anything against you ever, but I always thought you hated me, which for the last couple of years, which you can, but as long as you can have a civil conversation.
You talk about that show that happened and everything.
Well, no. Much later on, with people falsely attributing things to me and making false allegations to me and trying to label things that I wasn't, like, like supporting of rape of people and things of that nature.
Oh, I didn't even get caught up in all that. That's other stuff, drama. I didn't get in the middle of it. All that.
Well, I saw things that you said that really kind of bothered me because I never had any issue with you, and you were buying.
I said something about you.
Yeah, you were saying things that I was supporting a rapist and things of that nature.
No, Steve. Where did I see that at?
And video. Was it the comment section on the live chat? I would have to show it. I would have to find it. But even if you didn't, then that's fine.
Yeah, because I don't even know what the story is, so I know I couldn't have commented on it because I don't even know.
It was with that David Waring idiot. Remember David?
Your former host? Is that your former host?
No, I was a different idiot. No. David Warren was that one dude I had on for First Amendment auditing because I had him on once. People were like, "Oh, you're supporting a rapist." Remember that guy? I
remember we had me and that white nationalists had that discussion.
I remember that. Yeah. No. That was JF Therapy. No, that was that actually was one of my favorite episodes, believe it or not.
Right.
For people that don't know, Psychopath Atheist was on the show with JF Therapy, who I guess is a white nationalist now. I don't think he was at the time, at least not overtly. Mm-hmm. But you guys were having a conversation about ethnostate, and at the very end, they started agreeing with each other, and I'm like, what? No. And so you had a white nationalist, which I'll never have on again, and then you had Psychopath Atheist who was advocating for an ethnostate, and they were both like singing Kumbaya, and I'm like, this is weird. I don't like this. But anyways, blast from the past. But let me get your opinion here in a second, if I can just read these out first. Higgy said, just joined, but you have discussed trans people having brains more similar to gender than identify as than when they are born as. Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's possible that somebody could be born more with a gender-specific or sex-specific mind or brain, if you're talking about the actual brain, or you're talking about the mind, because they're not the same thing, as opposed to, the physical characteristics. I absolutely believe that people have gender dysphoria. I absolutely believe that trans people can have a completely biologically male body, but absolutely think like a female. Absolutely do I think that.
If you're talking about the architecture of the brain, I actually read something about this. I mean, it was a long time ago now, and I can't remember the specific the 100% details of it. So you have to forgive me if I get some aspects of this wrong. But essentially, what it was attempting to identify the biological sex of a person just by looking at the brain. I can't remember what the imaging technology was. Like I'm sure it must have been an MRI. It must have been an MRI. It would be the only thing that would provide you the contrast between the different densities to give you any kind of meaningful data.
Yeah. CT scan wouldn't do that. Not the high contrast.
No, not at all. Not at all. Unless you could have introduced some kind of contrast medium, I suppose, with the CT, but the MRI would be the way
high contrast dye.
And a neurologist, highly trained, neurologically trained radiologist, could identify the sex of a person 60% of the time just by looking at their brain.
Yeah, that's impressive.
It was
that's statistically viable.
But it's not much better than a coin flip.
No.
So what I'm saying is when you say to somebody that they've got a male brain or they've got a female brain, from the architecture of it, I don't know if that means much.
I think there's the midpoint. You can't draw conclusions for like everybody, but there's going to be certain circumstances where you probably could, right?
Of course.
Yeah. But I think the main thing we all agree on is that there are going to be people that suffering from gender dysphoria. And let's get back to the null thing in a second. Because I mean, if you want to eliminate suffering, which again, I'm not going to go on the limb and think that this guy really gives a shit one way or another. I don't. It doesn't seem like he's that compassionate. Okay, but let's say that you did want to eliminate suffering, because people that suffer from gender dysphoria are probably, people that have depression. They need psychological counseling because they're not happy with the body they're born with, and I understand they need medical help for that. Absolutely, and it's up to them and the medical practitioner to determine what course of action I think is the best course of action. And transitioning works for them. I'm all for that. Real quick, Figgy also says for 4,500 ARS. Thank you. That's pretty significant. He says, I was referring to sex.
So what currency is ARS?
Is it Royal Swedes? Is that what it is? I'm gonna have to. You're gonna make me Google this because I don't want to appear like an idiot.
Sorry, I couldn't identify it out of the gate. So I was like,
no, I think it's Argentinian. I think it's Argentinian. Yeah, it's the Argentinian peso. Because I remember he's from Argentina, so it's the Argentine peso. He says, I'm referring to, quote, sex as an environmental cues that often trigger that the development of males or females, like temperature, nutrients, or in the case of animals, and water availability, photoperiod, competitive stress, and pheromones from specific individuals. And we see that in the animal kingdom a lot. There are species that develop along the lines of what they're going to be male or female based upon environmental characteristics. This is true. I think amphibians are prone to that quite a bit, if I'm not mistaken.
So yeah, absolutely. Yeah, but I mean, with 99.9% of mammalian species, the chromosomes we now understand. So when we determined what the definition of male and what the definition of female was, we didn't have an understanding of genetics. What we did have an understanding of were the gametes that were being produced by males and the gametes that were being produced by females. We subsequently found that there is a high correlation of XY chromosome with males, and there is a high correlation of XX chromosomes with females. And if there is no, biology is a messy process, it's imprecise, it's very fudgy, it does have fuzzy borders, it always will, there's no getting away from it. And what we've subsequently found is that there is a causation from the XY chromosome and the XX chromosome into what typically develops, although you do have problems at some point. You have abnormalities or deformations that occur. You've got sensitivities and insensitivities to different hormones at different stages, and that can have an impact on secondary sex characteristics.
Yeah.
Primary sex characteristics, your organs are always causative and correlative with your XX or your XY chromosomes.
Yeah, no, I agree with that because even on the Y chromosome, the SRY gene, which is really the gene that really does the most of heavy lifting as far as the testes and differentiations of sex. If you're like 46XY or something, SRY plus, you're genetically a male, and so the SRY gene can be translocated to the X chromosome, and that happens frequently. Not frequently, but I mean, most of the time when there's a chromosomal abnormality and the SRY gene is translocated, it's going to be translocated to the X gene. But as long as all the genes there working, it's really not even noticeable from what I understand.
But I can't remember where I heard it, but I thought it was quite comical, and the ladies will like this, that XX is female and XY is male, but XY just looks like XX with a piece missing.
It's a shorter leg. Anyway,
yeah.
So psychopath, you kind of disagree with separating gender and sex. Why is that?
Because I really don't see the purpose in it outside of making people feel comfortable with the dysphoria that you were just speaking on. And I understand that these people have something going on where they feel like they're in the wrong body and everything else, and I agree that it's certain things people can try to do to try to help these people with these issues that they're going through, but I don't feel like the onus should be on society to just eliminate that universally scientific accepted terms that's been used for millennia just to make people feel comfortable, that obviously is going through some things mentally. And I feel like we doing us and them a disservice by doing so. And I understand that one of the main reasons why that they try to change this and try to separate gender from sex is because they'll try to say that gender is a quote unquote social construct, which that term irks me to no ends. People usually throw the term around social construct whenever they get backed into a corner. And it's kind of hard for them to
it's a modernist point of view. And I think there's some validity to it to some degree. But here's the thing. For example, if somebody does feel like they are neither male or female, they're considered what would be non-binary. That's how they generally might want to be expressed, right? To somebody who is female that wants to express as male. I don't see a reason why we wouldn't use gender differently. Because if they're saying, look, I don't feel like I'm neither male or female, that would be a difference in gender, right? Because when you ask them what gender they are, like, well, I really don't feel like I'm either. Now, I think where the confusion lies is when they start making gender into sexual attraction. When you start adding all these things like pansexual and omnisexual and demisexual and all these other things, you're no longer talking about gender, you're talking about sexual attraction. And I think that's really confusing because the only thing I can see out of bimodal distribution where you have two modes, male and female, you have to be somewhere on the distribution. You could be more male, more female, or you could be in the middle where you'd be non-binary. That makes sense logically. Okay, so gender would be different there from sex.
It's a sliding scale that we've acknowledged for eons. You know, we've always had tomboys, we've always had effeminate males. That's always been the case. And if we want to use the term gender to give that scale a name,
I'm okay with
fine.
that. Yeah.
I don't mind that.
Yeah, again, because again, words have utilities, right? And so if you're just saying, look, yes, I agree, there's two genders, male and female, but there's also people that express differently and may not express either, and you want to call that, you know, a difference in gender, I'm okay with that as well. But I don't believe in this like 80 different genders because those aren't genders; those are sexual attractions.
All right. Yeah. So, what's your opinion about race? Do you think somebody could be? Do you think transracialism is a thing?
No,
like,
but
somebody can be transracial.
I'm not a race realist, though.
I think transracialism has more justification in a weird way than.
I would agree with you.
Because you're adopting a culture, right? You're adopting a culture.
I have Jewish genetics. Mm-hmm. I have Spanish genetics. I have Irish genetics.
Right.
I have English genetics. If I decided to identify as Spanish, Jewish, Irish, or English, I would have more justification than if I decided to identify as a female.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I agree with you too. I'm Scottish, I'm Irish, I'm Russian, Polish. I got some Polish Jew. You know, it's okay. I think that if you want to identify with a culture, you know, but that doesn't make you that. But that's a culture, though. Like,
no,
for example, if you want to identify with a black culture, but that doesn't make you black. It doesn't make you white. And that's the distinction that people to be made is that you're identifying with the culture. When you had, remember a psychopath, what was the name of the lady that was actually white that was trying to pretend she was black for the head of the NAACP chapter? Remember her name?
Rachel Dolezal.
Rachel Dolezal. Yeah. That is just nonsense, right? She was perpetuating a fraud. Simple as that.
Mm-hmm.
That's no different. Yeah. That's no different than the, you know, like somebody claims to be transgender for like political clout.
Yeah,
it's the same thing.
Yeah, but okay, but you know what happens is, and this is a good segue to that. There are people that are going to be dishonest in their approach. We see people, I think, that are in sports that are dishonestly using it to their advantage to participate in sports with people that are not to the same league that they're in order to have an advantage. I think this does happen. It's rare, but I do think it happens. But the same thing, I think when I see people online use transgender and use these types of things as weapons, it's not an honest agent that should be doing this. A person who's going around saying that you're wrong by fiat and shutting down conversations are not helping the transgender communities. Matter of fact, almost most transgender people I've talked to, they don't want people going around bashing over their head. You must do this. You must do that. No. And matter of fact, you brought up a good point earlier, Psychopath, about what we're obligated to as a society, right? I don't think you can legislate pronoun usage. I don't think you can legislate, even in the workplace, certain things. Now, in the state of California, on the state of California, there was what's called the Civil Rights Act of 1964. I think it was Article 42. There is something called workplace bullying and harassment. And to misgender somebody, to harass them, is against the law. You can be fired for that. This is true. They can't legislate that. However, you can use their first name, and that's not bullying. If somebody is transgender and they want to go by a different pronoun that you're not comfortable with, like you don't use they or them, you can use their first name. That's perfectly acceptable. That's not considered to be bullying. But, you know, what onus do we have to use third-party pronouns like they or them, or Z or them, or any of those neo pronouns, which I think are absolutely ridiculous? What onus do we have for that? What do you think on that?
Go.
No, go ahead, John, and then we'll let Psycho go.
Well, my position on that was that if I'm responsible for my language. Nobody else is responsible for my language. If somebody wants me to use a particular terminology as a label for them, they have to do two things in order for me to adopt that. They have to convince me that they're sincere and they're not just trying to play some sort of like power game and get me to do something just because they want a power trip.
Right, which does happen. Which does happen. They also have to, and the more ridiculous the thing that they try to get you to concede is real or do, the more power they have exerted over you, and the more satisfaction they get. You see it on Twitter. That's the power.
It's one of the most
Twitter.
narcissistic things you will ever see.
I had people do that to me on Twitter, and I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to mute you at this point.
Yeah.
Because all you're doing is trying to have a power over me because I'm not agreeing with you, and that's not how it works.
And, so let's assume we get over that hurdle. Mm-hmm. They then have to convince me, so that there's the sincerity aspect of it. They then also have to convince me that there's a degree of utility to it and benefit to it for them.
Okay, that's a fair point. Now, let me ask you a quick though. For utility, for example, if we hire a transgender person and they portray as female, they're outright just a female as far as their expression. I think utility, you should call them she. Absolutely. I think, as a matter of fact, I think it's rude to not do that. But when you have people that are somehow, they're very masculine, they present as masculine, but then they'll go somewhere else and present female just to get a rise out of people, which I've seen happen too. That's that's the dishonest agent, right?
Yeah, I mean, apropos of what you just said, I would probably throw into that as well, although not as important as the other two, but I would say it is important, the consistency of behavior on their part.
Correct. Yeah, absolutely consistent. And also, when you have people with like pronouns things, the workforce cannot make you give your pronouns. They can allow for it. They can say you can express it, but a lot of people don't even want to do that. And I think it puts people in a spot when you have to enunciate your pronouns. Like, to me, I'm offended if you have to like guess my pronouns. I'm going to take that as offense. Not serious offense.
What do you think? What do you think my pronouns are, Steve?
I mean, where's the ambiguity there? I'm not really offended per se. I'm not. I had longer hair. From behind.
Can you see my excess testosterone from
exactly, right? Male pattern balding.
Yeah, you'll be offended if somebody asks you, like, they walked up to you and asked you, what pronoun do you identify as? You'll be insulted. Like,
and I'm not a big fan of that. To me, I think if somebody is like trans and they want to give their pronouns, to say, by the way, I do identify as he or she, that's fine. Nothing wrong with that. Then you can go by that. But when they try to weaponize it, which I see happen, that's where the problems begin. And this is another part of the discussion I want to get into real quick. I want to get Siggy in here. Siggy says for 225 ASR, however, there are certain circumstances that are tied to your culture or into a race, regardless of your genetics. Yeah, well, again, culture can be your upbringing. It could be the environment, or it could be through genetics. Like Judaism is considered through genetics through the maternal line, right? I'm Jewish, you're Jewish because of our mothers. But again, culture-wise, I wasn't really that brought up in that much of a Jewish culture. I mean, my mom would make matzah bra. That would about that extent. But Siggy,
that's a confidence of paternity thing, isn't it? Because obviously you're always 100% of the mother, but you couldn't be 100% of
the Jewish thing is tricky because you have people that are Jewish.
Essentially, even the Jews know that.
It's tricky when you talk about that.
Yeah, well, you get the black Hebrew Israelites who think they're the true Jew, which is fascinating. So let me ask Siggy real quick. So Siggy, where are you on board so far with? Where do we diverge on this? And then I do want to get back on the workplace thing because I think there's a topic to be had there real quick.
I don't know if you can hear me.
Yeah.
I think you guys are nailing it so far. It's still difficult because you got to define your terms to be able to have this conversation without confusion, or maybe without unwillingly saying something that might not be construed as something.
Well, that's what John was doing we were doing it for the base up. That's why we started at that very base of what we agree upon and see where we diverge from.
But I think so far I agree with most of what you guys have said.
Well, that's good.
I think it's also important to know that my impression from regarding the social discussion around the pronouns and genders and stuff like that is that it's been radicalized at some point, but mostly from people resisting this. Most of the time, the people that tries to weaponize this that I've seen are not actually people that are looking to find their own identity. It's usually people that are trying to. It's a classical 2015, and I identify as a combat helicopter thing. I haven't seen anyone truly or honestly transgender trying to weaponize it. But
I have in my experience, and it's unfortunate.
I haven't in my experience. I'm not saying that they don't exist. I haven't met one yet. But
I've met one in real life, though. That's the funniest thing. In real life, no. I mean, I have some customers that I clearly know are transgender, but yeah, it's a non-factor.
It should be a non-factor. I mean, it's who cares?
Yeah.
This is the thing,
because they're not trying to weaponize it, and they're just shopping.
Yeah, but the whole thing around this is so ridiculous, because it's like, what difference does it make to society or even your life is if I right now 9,000 kilometers away from you decide that I am a woman and I live my life as a woman.
But Siggy, goes back to what John said earlier. When it going back to the Michael Knowles thing, and I had that on Twitter here. When it came back to this guy, John made a good point that he was saying in public life he wanted to eradicate transgenderism, because it's something that seems to be always in people's faces, kind of stuff. Now in real life, I don't see that because I don't experience that. I have some transgender customers, but nobody cares, right? The thing with the workplace, we don't have any transgenders that are currently working for the company I'm with. But if they did, again, nobody would care. However, there is something to be said by certain companies that may not want to hire somebody who's transgender because they're afraid they might weaponize it, because they're afraid that it makes the workplace a much more uncomfortable place because you don't have an honest agent. That's something that should be up for discussion, that a lot of people want to shut down that discussion because they don't want to face the fact that not all people are honest agents. If you had an honest agent who's transgender, nobody ever should care about making that making that a factor when hiring. Absolutely not. That is discrimination.
That's
definitely,
I definitely agree with that. Look,
but it's the dishonest agents you got to worry about.
No, definitely, but it's the same case with the bathroom thing.
Yeah, no, same thing, right? Exactly. But isn't what Michael was talking about?
My problem is not with the actual transgender people going to a specific bathroom. My problem is with people trying to use that to, for instance, commit abuse.
Yeah,
right.
So,
no, absolutely.
So this is the point. This is the point that I was making earlier. The issue isn't the sincere transgender person. It's that if you open up your legislation and your social policy to such a wide degree that any dishonest person can very easily abuse it, then the safe spaces that we've carved out in our society for women are essentially erased. And that's got nothing to do with malicious actions from sincere transgender people, because you don't get malicious actions from sincere transgender people. You get the malicious actions from the dishonest people.
Right.
And as we've previously discussed, our society has 1 to 3% of sociopathic and psychopathic people in it, and we have to account for them. If the policy is so full of gaping holes that anybody can just wander through any barrier they like, then it's not fit for purpose.
And that's where the discussion to be had. How do we protect the people from the dishonest agents that's going to take advantage of these loopholes, which they will inevitably do and have done?
Well, but the thing is that usually that debate is basically stalled by people from a metaphysical standpoint denying the existence of trans people. And so I've seen it used also in conversations between theists and atheists. Like, you actually believe in God, but you don't know it yet, or you don't want to admit it as a way to erase the possibility that actually some of us do not believe in God.
So real quick, real quick,
it's kind of difficult to.
Dr. Dan, I see you out in the live chat there. If you want to come in, you're more than welcome to. He says this is stupid. Nobody has said that so far in the hour and a half we've been on. Nobody has said this.
Stupid?
Yeah, nobody has said this is stupid. In fact, nobody has said anything negative since we've been streaming for 90 minutes. Nobody.
So I still don't get what's the this is stupid bit.
He hasn't said. So Dr. Dan, if you think this is stupid, I'd like to know why. Because again, nobody has said anything negative since we started streaming. Not one person. And we haven't blocked anybody, nor have we timed anybody out. And I'm here with psychopath atheist who's an ethnocentrist.
Also, I want to point out too that I've been in very obscure places on the internet having this conversation with other people, and this is by far the most civilized I had in the last 5 years.
And I appreciate that. And Siggy and I don't agree on certain things. We start off pretty negative to each other.
It was kind of rough, yeah.
Yeah, it was kind of rough, but he reached out to me and he said, "Look, English is not my first language. I realized he was from Argentina, and maybe there were some things lost in communication. I took that on board, and everything's been great ever since then. So I'm really glad that he did, because I think that these conversations are so volatile that if there's any miscommunication between languages, it makes it epically more difficult to have the discussion.
Yeah.
And it's sad. It really is.
Sometimes it feels like having these conversations. You're having these conversations with cult members. I got to keep it real with you. Mm-hmm. It seems like they move as a cult, like in any kind of legit pushback, because any movement can have some legit pushback against it or whatever. But it's in good faith. But but everything is always malicious, right? Some people have valid points that they want to raise because they see an issue here. And if you try to raise these points up and to one of these cult members, they will try to shame you, and immediately you're a homophobe, right. And all this stuff. Yeah, shaming language comes, and
right. That's repressive. That's repressive tolerance in action. That basically is
it's so difficult.
Yeah, if you, in other words, if they don't want you to have the conversation, and again, this is when they go protest and they shut down free speech. And again, there are some speeches that I don't think should necessarily happen. I'm not a full speech absolutist. If you're out there advocating violence, you shouldn't have a platform. If you're out there advocating for racial supremacy, I'm not going to give you a platform. I just don't think those things should be platform in any kind of situation. But I understand free speech absolutists go one step further. Like, yeah, if it's not inciting violence, go ahead and say what you got to say. I don't think I'd go to that extreme. But Free Rebel said a good question. Why do we need laws to protect somebody's preferred pronouns? Because there are people that will harass people because they are transgender or because they are gay. And by one of the ways they'll do that is by willfully trying to misgender them or use something against them in order to bully and harass them. That's why. And that's why there are laws in workplace to prevent that. And I totally get that. Absolutely. And the same reason why if you're gay, if somebody walks up in, if you're in the workplace environment, if me and John are working together and John happens to be gay and I'm like, yo, homo, I just mean it by, you're just a man, homos are man. That's not what they mean by that. It's bullying, right? That's considered to be something that would go to HR because you are creating a hostile work environment, right?
Look, it's like anything. I work I work with lots of other trades. I work in the building industry. I run a company specializing in timber frame buildings. The banter on these sites with different trades can be absolutely brutal. And it's all done in good spirit and in good humor. It's a fine line. Don't get me wrong. It's like, I had one guy make a mum joke to me once, and I said, you couldn't handle my mum. She'd rip you apart like a fucking chicken wing. And he didn't know what to do with it because I just owned it, Yeah. But so it's really spicy sometimes.
Well, Dr. Dan, sorry, good.
You need like this. You could have the situation where somebody goes, look, actually, can you refer to me as a she, please? Because I'm that's how I'd prefer. And if that person insists on calling that person he, like pretending that they don't know their name and going, oh yeah, that guy over there. Or now, if they don't want to use if you want to avoid using the pronoun she because you have an ideological opposition to using that pronoun where the person is biologically male
use their first name or whatever name
use their fucking name
or moniker.
Yeah, you can avoid it. And so if somebody, and we have plenty of workplace legislation and policy that is designed to. I don't think we need to bolt additional legislation on.
No, I don't think anything needed. I think it's already in place.
It's already there.
There's already sufficiency there. Dr. Dan says, I said, who is going to pretend to be trans? That's the stupidest, most insulting thing I've heard this week. Yeah, let's pretend to be the most demonetized minority. People do that because they want...
People do that all the time. I just saw a tweet a couple hours ago, someone trying to do it here in Argentina as well.
And Siggy, by the way, Siggy is a big advocate for the LGBTQ community. Siggy is woke as fuck, okay? So this is you are woke as fuck, you would probably say. So Siggy is not somebody who's any remotely even conservative, I would imagine. They are full liberal. And so, yeah, people will do it. But here's the thing, Dr. Dan. Even if they're not, detending, would you agree there are possibly people that have been told they're trans, even though they might have something else other than being trans? They might be effeminate, they might be gay, they might, been told, oh, you're definitely, and this does happen by medical professionals. Oh, yeah, you should be transitioning. I can tell you were born in the wrong body. This happens in the medical profession. And so, they have these people that are out there, bullying people rather than, just living their lives as the expression that they want to have. So, yeah, I think a lot of people do weaponize it. We see it, it happens, unfortunately. And by the way, one quick reason to doubt says, God, this show would be funny if it weren't so sad. Again, why? You have all these people having a civil dialogue. You have 4 people in here from vastly different perspectives. I can tell you right now, Psychopath the Atheist and I probably don't agree on a lot of things. I've known him for 10 years, give or take.
Gotta say though, this conversation is really interesting and whatnot, but it's quite less diverse than I would expect.
I believe in diversity.
For me, I want to say this. For me personally,
I was whatever you like. It's no problem.
I mean, I was really an asshole. I'm still a little bit, but I was really an asshole in this specific subject maybe 8 years ago. And it took a long time to deconstruct that. And the first thing that you got to do is actually find people that are transgender and listen to what they say, and try to take that what they say. But
they don't agree with. They agree on all things. No, they
don't agree with each other either. Yeah. Every time someone says something about the collective, the LGBTQ, there's no such a thing. It's like trying to find who runs Antifa.
We're not an ant colony or a beehive.
Generalizations.
Yeah.
Somebody asked me. I got a question.
So just with what Dr. Dan has just said. Mm-hmm. Sorry, Steve. I just wanted this Dr. Dan thing. Who's saying that the notion that
he's a biologist, by the way, and one I respect. Look, I got Dr. Dan is very good at what he does, notion that and I like watching his stuff. So I can't shit on the guy.
But how is it offensive or ridiculous?
I don't know.
To state that a non-transgender person wouldn't pretend to be a transgender person. I'm looking at a news article that is on the face of it fucking bonkers. So I am looking at a news article right now. This is from The Guardian, the most leftist of left-wing newspapers on the face of the fucking planet. And they're talking about a transgender prisoner called Isla Bryson, who is a convicted double rapist who, after they were convicted, but before they were sentenced, decided that they were going to identify as a woman and got housed in a woman's prison. We have housed a biological male.
That happened in Jersey too.
That
happened in Jersey.
You're telling me they're a legitimate transgender person?
That happened in.
That's your position.
1 sec.
I have serious issues with you.
That happened in New Jersey. That happened in New Jersey. You probably talking about the one in New Jersey, Steve.
The one that impregnated two.
Yeah, two. See,
and one of them,
inmates.
Well, quick, I'll let you finish. One of them, because you're familiar with this. One of them impregnated 2 inmates. One of them was actually for underage and was housed where women were allowed to have their children with them.
Yeah. Yes. This happens. That's why I think it's gullible to think that this is like something absurd or whatever.
It's idealism, and it's not reality.
We have another person in the UK who was convicted of sexually assaulting, not raping, but sexually assaulting 2 women and fucking a dog who identified as a woman and was housed in a women's prison. You cannot tell me. I don't give a shit if they are sincere. I don't give a shit if they are sincere. We put women in prison who commit crimes and they're deserving of punishment. But I stop short of the state-sponsored and industrialized rape of these prisoners by people who claim to be women who clearly are fucking not.
So let's ask
Dr. Dan, how about we get our ducks in a row about what we're prepared to subject women to in environments where they are literally locked in boxes with other people?
And that's a great question. And I like Dr. Dan to respond to that. And by the way, it would be easier if Dr. Dan came in. But somebody asked me, the banner Hamari Kimi says, can you state your opinion on transgender? I just came in late and want to know. I don't really understand the question.
Hey Steve, did you send him a link? Because once you put the poll up, I can see the link anymore in the chat.
It's still up there. I'll end the poll. It was 75% yes, by the way. So the pin's up there. You should be able to see it. I understand the question. I believe that there are statistically some portion of society that have gender dysphoria. That's what I'm going to call transgender. They're not. They're outside present. A way they present or their anatomical features are not matching. The genes or the karyotype. So there's a differentiation between genotype or phenotype or karyotype or phenotype or how they present. And then they just don't feel like they're the gender that they're assigned or what the body would be, right? For example, like I present male because I'm physically male, but if I felt like a woman and I wanted to dress like a woman and have the mannerisms of a woman and what we consider to be social norms for a female, because again, there are roles in society. I mean, it's just we're humans.
But you don't have to be called the women to be dressed.
No, there's some people
they used to be called drag queens,
some
right?
But they like to identify as males who just happen to like dressing as females,
right?
And,
that's the part I don't understand is why do they have to call themselves a woman to do it?
Because they actually do think that their psychology is that as a thing like a female. I don't know what it would be like to think like a female because I don't think like a female.
I don't even. I mean, just as a little segue on that, I don't even know what it would be like. I can say I feel like a man, and the reason I feel like a man is because I am a man, and whatever I feel like is what a man feels like. But I don't know what you feel like, Steve, to be a man.
Yeah,
so how the hell, like me saying that I feel like, for me to say that I feel like a woman is kind of a nonsensical statement. But I can understand how a person would have that subjective sense, and that it would be beneficial for them to conduct their life in our society as a woman. And if it would be beneficial for them, I'm not going to stop them. I'm not going to get in their way.
Dr. Dan says something that's interesting. He says people being pushed to transition doesn't happen. I disagree with that fully. Literally not one example of a kid being pushed to transition without counseling. I'm putting my kids to bed. Get your facts straight, y'all. I could not disagree with you more. They are being pushed by their parents.
We've just shut down the Tavistock clinic in the United Kingdom that has 1,000 court cases pending against it for that exact reason. For malpractice.
Yeah.
So, Dr. Dan, where the fuck are you from? I mean, Jesus.
I don't know. And like I said, he is a biologist, and I have a lot of respect for Dr. Dan, but I think you're absolutely wrong on that. I think your facts are incorrect because there are litigations right now for medical malpractice for parents that went to certain practitioners that were pushing for transition within 6 seconds of counseling kind of stuff. I mean this has happened.
Forget children.
People have talked about this, detransition people.
Yeah, but also at the same time, you can understand that it's a fine equilibrium between both things, because traditionally, and at least in Argentina, for instance, the percentage of trans people that end up killing themselves is huge.
Well, because
the great part is because of the way we treat them as a society. And the thing is,
no.
Hold on, let me finish that part. It's in great, at least in this part of the world, it is. They're marginalized in every
Argentina is probably worse.
80% of the people that is transgender in Argentina has to are sex workers because they can't find a job. So democracy at some point is also a game of trying to legislate for the minorities to protect them from certain things. And I understand that that sounds like a privilege, but at the same time, it actually is not. So it's like when the feminism try to achieve certain goals, people start talking about the privilege. When homosexuals try to get the right to get married, people were talking about privilege. And something kind of similar happens with this as well. When they say, "Hey, we need to protect these people," and then it's like, because they're what, above the line? No, it's just they're a minority and they need to be protected because socially clearly and culturally clearly we're not yet to the point where you're gonna see a transgender people walking down the street and it's just gonna be a person. We're far away from that yet.
Yeah, you're right. But like I said, in my area, I'm in California. It's a lot more liberal state and really
of course. I was just about to say I can't speak for Argentina, but in this country they well protected.
We really don't.
Protected
seriously,
in this country.
You go back east and you go back in the southern states, then maybe there's obviously most of these videos you see that happen. You see it happen back east and in California. Seriously, people in California are like, live your life the way you fucking want and stay out of other people's business. That's how we live here. Seriously,
California is the most liberal state in the union.
Yes,
I work for a company in Raleigh in North Carolina.
Oh, I'm familiar with Raleigh.
Well, I I flew back to Argentina one time, and 3 months later, when I came back, one of my coworkers was actually a female now and had transitioned, and nobody bat an eye.
Yeah,
it was just fine. Nobody.
It's the way it should be, right?
And that's how it should be.
So,
but that's like a tiny sample of society compared to.
So let me ask you though. So Luth AMF says expressed differently, absolute nonsense. What do they think transgenderism is? Is somebody who expresses differently from what they're biologically assigned, or what what their genotype or what they feel they are? Like.
Well, I would say biologically observed. I don't think it's assigned.
Okay, that's fine. Well, in the medical jargon, it's what they're assigned. I think it's kind of ambiguous, but I mean,
I think the assigned phrase has been hijacked.
A trans woman.
The whole term cis. That's what that's supposed to mean. What you was born as or identify as at birth, or something along those lines.
Yeah, right, exactly. But I mean, the whole point of why they're trans women is they were biological men that transitioned to female. Now, again, the thing is, for gender is what they transition. I'm absolutely 100% believe you cannot change your biological sex. And if Dr. Dan, who's a biologist, has a paper that you can show me that somebody has changed their actual gametic biological sex, I'd be very fascinated to read that. But I don't think that he has, and that's not what happens when you have somebody who is transitioning. It is more of a psychological state by their transitioning, by their appearance as matching their psychological state, whether it be through dressing, how they dress, or through actual surgical alterations, which again, between them and the medical professionals, or hormones. Yeah.
Sorry, Steve. So, I mean, I've got a list of stuff that I consider position a reasonable interlocutor to hold.
So we've had 3 so far, right? We had 3 or 4.
Yeah, I've like another 6. Can I just go through, list a lot, and you, in the interest of time, you pick, or
go ahead.
somebody pick what you think's interesting.
Yeah, I'll let somebody pick. Psychopath can pick, and Siggy.
So, no medical intervention is without side effects or unintended consequences or symptoms. Hormone and surgery is not completely reversible. Any medical intervention essentially does have an unintended consequence. There's no perfect surgical or pharmacological intervention. We have to account for those risks. You can't just say it's completely reversible, therefore don't worry about it, take this pill.
Yeah, I agree.
We have to concede that point.
Right.
Aspirin isn't without unintended consequences. So how the fuck are hormones?
You can get stomach issues with aspirin.
Specifically in that point,
yes, you can.
For puberty is also not something.
Yeah, and by the way, the whole discussion for puberty blockers and children transitioning is a whole different topic altogether that I'm not ready to have. But it's a whole different topic to be in its entirety.
Is it in your list of topics to talk about transgenders and sports? That one is also pretty hot.
Maybe. I got to do critical race theory. I got to do gun control, and then we'll go from there.
If it's badminton or chess, I don't give a shit. If it's MMA and somebody's punching the living fuck out of somebody, maybe we need to have a chat about it.
I tend to agree too.
Dude, I'm not gonna lie. I love when these people step up to an MMA fighter on the street, not knowing what they're getting themselves into, and the MMA fighter just knocks the shit out of them.
Yeah. I Taekwondo, man, and they step up to somebody who's competently trained in grappling, and all of a sudden they're having their arms and legs pulled off.
Yeah. in any case, I'm not in shape to face a biological or trans female.
All right, continue. I think we all agree.
So, in related to the previous point, our surgical capability in what we can do in terms of the aesthetics of secondary sexual characteristics it's bigged up. They make it seem that it's more comprehensive and competent than it actually is.
I think they overstate the expectations of the person.
Yeah, that in no other aspect of life would it be acceptable? Like if somebody sells you a car and they tell you that it will do 80 miles to the gallon and it ends up doing 30, that's unacceptable. So if somebody sells you a surgery telling you you're going to have a perfectly functional male penis and you end up having all of these massive medical complications and it looks like some sort of like plucked sausage shaped chicken.
If it's psychologically, if it helps them, like I said, that's between them and this doctor.
Yeah,
but again, you cannot sell something.
You can't oversell.
Right, you can't oversell. Now
you can't oversell because you're taking a psychologically precarious person,
right,
overselling them something, and then barreling on a load of disappointment and what may actually be permanent physical damage.
So let me ask you, because I would assume it's a very rare situation where somebody actually has full surgical top and bottom. It's very rare as compared to the amount of people in the world. But how many people do you think have regretted it and sued? Because I don't know the numbers on that. I have no idea.
Well, I mean, I don't know what the total number of patients are dealt with by the Tavistock Clinic, but we've got 1,000 of them that are currently trying to sue the Tavistock Clinic in the UK equivalent of a class action lawsuit. Mm-hmm. That's 1,000, and these are 1,000, not just transgender people. The vast majority of these were minors when they were being treated. Mm-hmm. So I don't really care what the percentage is.
That's still a significant number.
That's a shitload of people. Yeah. And my issue, just segueing from this list slightly and deviating into the child issue. So somewhere between 80 and 90% of children who experience gender dysphoria, if they go through normal puberty, come out the other side of it without gender dysphoria, mm-hmm. and have a higher probability of either being lesbian or gay.
Yeah, or bi.
Right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So now, if we're in the situation where we've got the portion of detransitions, we're actually in the situation where if you cannot give me a methodology that very, very accurately identifies the children that would benefit from the treatment and the children that have come out the other side and are going to end up being gay, then not only are you doing more harm than good, you're actually weaponizing transgender clinical care against the gay community. Well, unintentionally.
The problem is they have a guideline. It's a 302.6 guideline for gender identity disorder in children. If you look at the International Foundation for Gender, they do have these conditions, and I've seen them. But the thing is that they could apply one to adults, and they're still very unquantifiable. They're very, very subjective, right? You know, if you felt this way for over 6 months, you know, if you don't feel like you want to play with Barbie versus trucks or something like that. I mean, I don't think that's actually in there, but there is. I don't remember the exact specificities, but there was a guideline to be had on the for children for gender identity. However, gender identity disorder. However, when you're talking about a medical procedure, to me, I think it has to be such a small minority. But I think they're over generalizing and that they're applying the ones that are very, very small minority, and they're just overreaching. And so you have children that probably would have been normal growing up and just got over the gender dysphoria and been, gay or lesbian or bi and been very content, but you can't know because you've already intervened.
We've got children in the United Kingdom that went through the Tavistock Clinic that were given either the drug that suspends regular puberty or proactive.
Sorry, but just quickly to clarify, when you're talking about surgery, you're talking about transsexuals. You're talking about changing your genitalia, basically. You're not talking about
some surgery that changes your external appearance. It might be mastectomies for removing breasts. It might be the vaginoplasty, or I forget what the name of the one for the penis is.
There's a number of other cosmetic surgeries that will basically make you look more the gender you want to be part of.
Yeah, I mean, even something as innocuous as sort of like liposuction or lipid fat injections for like redistributing fat to make them look more curvy.
So in general,
by the way, liposuction is when people die from that all the time. A woman just died; she got liposuction in a local mall and died.
So when I say innocuous, I don't mean that there's no risk. What I mean by liposuction is the fact that
in the local mall.
Seriously, local mall. It's like
that's kind of hurtful, man.
But here's the thing. Would you agree also that even people making these decisions as an adult, we define adult legally as 18, but we also know that the human brain isn't really solidified until about 25.
Right.
There's a lot of plasticity there. Do you think that they should be able to make those kind of decisions? Now, again, I think it's between them and their doctor, but I think, again, doctors are not saviors. Doctors do not always do the right thing. They do sometimes what's convenient or profitable.
Yeah, I was just about to say, most doctors.
Psycho, go ahead.
Yeah, but most doctors don't perform a hysterectomy between the ages of 18 and 35 with a woman. And
that's very true. I've had no women that have they have cysts on their ovaries, right? Massive cysts, and the doctors have done everything possible to prevent a bilateral hysterectomy, because they were like, nope, we don't want to remove both ovaries. We don't want to move the uterus. They have endometriosis. They have all these medical conditions, and yet the doctors will do whatever it takes to preserve that until they think that they're beyond childbearing age or at a decision where they don't want children, because they recognize that people might change their mind later on. And once you remove both ovaries and or remove the uterus, you're done at that point. You're done. There's no going back.
Right.
The concerning thing about the brain development as well, with sort of people under the age of 25, two of the things that jump out at me, and specifically in relation to the unreversible consequences of some of these drugs and surgeries that get undertaken, the bit of your brain that has one of the most fundamental impacts on how you behave pre-25 and post-25 that develops is your long-term assessment and your short-term assessment of consequences and risk.
Correct. Yep, absolutely. And by
It's
the way,
the bit that you, the most important bit that you need to make an informed decision.
I think everybody when they're younger took more risks than we do when we're older. I guarantee it. I did not think the same when I was in my mid-20s as I do now. I mean, I didn't think I was untouchable, but I didn't think of the ramifications as much as I do now. Absolutely.
You did think to your 20s that you would never do today.
Oh, yeah.
How many of us as a 10, 12, 13-year-old kid would climb a 60, 70, 80-foot tall tree? As a 25-year-old, you'd look at it and go, fuck that, I'm going down the pub.
I used to do light rock climbing, not like the grappling, but just little light stuff, right? And I like to go to the little cliffs and climb, and I was really kind of strong, as a teenager, and not parkour, but I was in decent shape. I couldn't do that at my age. Hell no. And then thinking about, there was one time I actually got stuck. I was like 15, and I got stuck on this overhang above the ocean, and it probably was only maybe 20 or 30 feet fall. It wasn't enough to kill me, but I was still scared to death. And I had people come out and get me. But I wouldn't do that now. I mean,
sorry to interrupt. I gotta go. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you very much for your input and your support.
If you don't know and haven't seen her, I recommend you all to check out Counterpoint. She's a YouTube creator.
Everybody knows Counterpoint.
Transgender,
very familiar.
And she actually transitioned kind of like on YouTube, so you can actually hear her talk about this in depth, and it's really interesting. I definitely recommend.
I appreciate it.
I'm familiar.
Yeah. And like I said, Sig, this episode has actually shown that we can have non-rancorous conversations about these very volatile topics. And unfortunately, only 2 people came into the live chat and started throwing these, bombs, like.
Oh, but I've enjoyed this thoroughly. Yeah. It's really difficult to find people to have these conversations with.
But yeah, and I appreciate the fact that you being very, involved in the LGBTQ plus communities and strong advocate, and well, I think all of us are advocates for LGBTQ rights, shows that there's conversations that can be talked about without people just coming in and go, oh, this is stupid or this is dumb. Those people have no business being in the conversation at that point, because they've already
delivered no meaningful content.
Nothing, no content whatsoever. Yeah. The falsities that people use too. I mean, to say that there's been nobody that's taken advantage of these situations and nobody has done, dishonest agents, I just find to be completely untenable. But
if you're going to tell me that my position is stupid, at least caveat that with the reason why you think it's stupid.
Right.
Don't just tell me you think it's stupid.
That's the definition of ad hom.
I just think
you're wrong because you're stupid. It's ad hom. It's literally.
I just think that as a society, we should actually try to listen more to what transgender people is trying to say, and try to talk about that and not our own fears.
And that's absolutely
true. That's what usually happens.
But this, like you said, you have counterpoints. You have Blair White. Some people like Blair White. Some people don't.
Those two are like two sides of the same coin.
It's very interesting. I've listened to both. But again, you open up the dialogues, and if people want to come in and give their side, absolutely. That's this was an open dialogue, and the link was provided for any trans person to come in and have that discussion. But I think it really does go down to the topic of the biology versus bigotry. When you see people coming in and you're saying, oh, this is stupid, to me that's bigotry, because you're automatically just by fiat saying some position is wrong irrationally rather than actually addressing the topics at hand. And so I think this was a very good demonstration of a midpoint conversation from people like myself, who's a centrist, who doesn't have to take one of these extreme viewpoints,
Right.
Yeah, definitely. And just one last thing. Try not to misgender other people.
Right, don't be a dick.
It's just rude and nonsense.
Yeah. Look,
try not to misgender people. It's not that difficult. Let's try not to be dicks, everyone.
Look, and I don't. You shouldn't be advocating everybody out there put your pronouns or your bios kind of stuff. If people want to give their pronouns, fine. If they don't force them to. They may be uncomfortable, but once they do, then fine. But normally people will tell you, hey, look, I prefer she or something like that. Okay, at that point, fine, call them she. There's no reason not to. But to go up to ask people, are you a he or a she? I find it to be offensive. I don't know. Maybe that's just me. I wouldn't want somebody to come up and say that to me, because there have been such situations where I'm like, I don't know what to call them, ma'am or sir. Now, sir is generally actually androgynous, believe it or not. Sir, it can be either, because in the military you do call women officers sir, but still in the civilian sector it's more masculinized, obviously. But yeah, it's hard sometimes because you're like, I'm not sure what to. But you know what? During the conversation, they'll usually tell you. They'll.
A lot of the time, even if you can identify the biological sex of a person because of the way they're dressed or because of the way they present themselves, it may be ambiguous as to what you think their preference may be. Under that set of circumstances, it might be prudent to take a guess. Exactly. It might be prudent to ask.
Yeah, that's fine. Exactly.
If you get it wrong, or if you ask, I would expect there to be a generosity of my intent.
But I'll give you a perfect example. I had a customer who's generally a little effeminate, probably gay, but I've never asked, but effeminate. But they happen to work somewhere where they can wear some really outlandish things. And they came in with a female, just absolutely Gaelic, Irish, red hair, big boob, the whole 9 yards, right? And makeup. And I know they're not trans, right? I know they're not trans, but they just happen to be wearing that for their work that they happen to do, right? Because the work they have to do promotes festivals and things of that nature.
Right, okay. That context makes more sense.
Yeah. It was a really good job too, but they have to be very feminine. So, if you were to say to them, "Hey, using her or she," he would have been offended because I know he identifies as a dude. He's absolutely very effeminate, but you cannot make those assumptions for that very reason because people are looking at him really weird. People that work with me all know him and going, "Damn, that's freaking awesome." We knew that he wasn't transgender, but somebody else might mistake him to be, and he'd be like, "No, I'm just wearing this." The
other thing as well, I think that is interpreted sometimes as sorry, go on.
Yeah, I just want to say, Steve, thanks for having me up. I got a package downstairs. I got to go pick up.
All right, hey Psycho, let me know when you're because I'm gonna do something critical race theory. If you've have you read up on that at all?
Yes. I'm familiar with that. Yeah.
Yeah, I figured as much. I think that's a good topic too because there's a lot of misunderstanding when it comes to critical race theory, and if people think that I'm somehow I'm against CRT, it's like no, I'm against certain aspects of it, certain things I agree with. Again, midpoint, set a line. I don't think it's something that is all inclusively correct. I think it makes some good points, but I think like anything else, they go to an extreme, and I think Non-Sequitur Show talks about the non-extremes. Unless you talk about flat Earth, then we're talking about extremes. But anyways, I think Psychopath.
I just did a show going in on flat Earthers.
They're still around, dude. Out of all the work we put into it, they still exist.
Yes.
Blame Rhett's rhetoric. He'll never let it die. All right. Thanks, bud.
All right, no doubt. Thanks for having me up.
Yeah. All right. Siggy Sigwall says for another 225 ARS. It's great convo. Thank you. And that means a lot, Siggy. It really does because again, if you look at the people that came in on listening to the show, almost every one of them thought it was a good show. Every one of them thought that this was a good dialogue, except for two people, which were from Twitter, that came in, oh, this is stupid, not even listening to the beginning. So, again, I'm not going to have a conversation with them. It just...
Well, the other thing that I thought was mentioned that was interesting was I think there's something that needs to be accounted for that isn't. The transgender population is a tiny percentage of the population. And sometimes the perception of, oh, that's odd, I've not seen that before, that's a bit of a novelty. That reaction from a person, which is a perfectly reasonable reaction for any member of society to have for something that is novel, is perceived as bigoted hatred.
Right, and that's not bigotry.
Just the acknowledgement of something novel that you're not used to seeing in your day-to-day life. Right. And there needs to be some then we need to account for that as well. And that could even be a race thing. I mean, if you're in a very homogenized society by virtue of race, and you see somebody who is a different race, different skin color, wearing some very very different clothing, there is a degree of novelty to that. And as long as you're not an objectively horrible asshole to that person because of it, it's novelty. It's not bigotry.
Again, those are by area. Like again, where I live is very diverse. We have
that's why in California,
we have Muslims
California
come in. We have people in full hijab.
In California, it's less of a novelty than it would be in Idaho.
Right.
That's
why the motto in California is "Live your fucking life and stay out of other people's business." That's how we get by.
So I've got 3 more things on this list, Steve. I appreciate we're 2 hours in at this point.
One second, let me finish this real quick, and then you have it. He says, "Thanks for letting me chime in. I'll hear the rest while I drive." Thank you, Siggy. Okay, go ahead. What's the rest?
Cool. Some transgender people will absolutely benefit from surgery, hormones, or other pharmaceuticals, regardless of the previously discussed risks and imperfect aspect of them. That's absolutely the case. There will be some transgender people that absolutely benefit. So we can't remove those options by fiat.
And I wish we had more time, because that's a whole different thing when it comes to the law. But I think it just as a summary, laws that prevent those types of things, they're unjust laws. Now, again, we're not talking about children. I'm not
agreed. It's ring-fenced children.
But for an adult, that's between you and your primary care physician. There shouldn't be any laws that even remotely have anything to do with that.
Yeah. Another one, a sincere, setting aside how we determine if a person is sincere, just let's set that aside. A sincere transgender person should be, wherever reasonably possible, accommodated.
Yeah. Well, exactly. And by the way, Higgy says, Steve, have you heard of Finister? And that's a good example. Finister is actually somebody who is not sincere. They literally dress up on, I think it's Twitter or Twitch. It's not Twitter. It has to be Twitch, I guess, right? As some kind of like, those e-girls that like beg for money as they play games.
Yeah, like an e-thought. Yeah.
E-thoughts. And that's literally what they do. They're known for this. They're not but here's the thing. At that point,
I'm a strong, independent woman. I don't need no man. Then you men over there give me some money.
But let me ask, this is interesting. At that point, are they not being honest agents? They're telling people what they're doing. I mean, everybody knows that they are putting on a show.
Yeah, I mean, at some point, a scam is so obviously a scam, it actually performs a public service, because it provides a little bit of Darwinism in our world.
Well, we had the same thing. Remember that teacher that had the size Z breast? Right, those prosthetics.
Yeah, that's ridiculous.
I think that was a troll. Although
I think it was.
They're now saying they weren't prosthetics; they were real, and it's just like,
they said some sort of like gynecomastia issue or something. Yeah.
But how do you go from no breast to gynecomastia in like over one season? I mean, they teach before. No, I mean it was clearly, and I think was a big troll. But at that point, they're trolling. Are they being?
I hope it was a troll, because otherwise it was incredibly sinister.
Oh yeah, no, I hope it was a troll too. I mean, but even then, it was a troll to push back against really silly,
the guy was a workshop and resistant materials teacher. I mean, and I'm going to use the word guy here because it is a guy. But just from the perspective of, you can't have those juggernauts anywhere near the bandsaw or the chop saw, you moron. Get out of the fucking classroom. That would have been justification enough for me there. I didn't need anything else.
Yeah. But go ahead. What's the other one?
A transgender person may demand to be tolerated, but they cannot demand acceptance. Nor may they demand compelled speech or action on the part of others.
I agree.
Especially speech or action or association on the part of others. Freedom of speech and freedom of association is an absolute human right that supersedes the hurt feelings of all people. I agree,
but there are ramifications. For example, going back to the workplace environment, right? I have to explain loss prevention, and obviously HR is kind of a part of that. But if you are purposely trying to create a hostile work environment by misgendering somebody, there's ramifications for that. You have the freedom to do that, but they also have the freedom to can your ass, right? There are ramifications. You cannot now. Should there be criminal liabilities? No, then you've gone too far, right? You cannot criminalize speech. You cannot criminalize. Now there are again some what's called hate fighting words, hate speech, but those I think are exception for some really good reasons. But a free speech absolutist would say no, we can't even have any criminalization of hate speech. I think it's an intentional tort in some ways.
Yeah, I mean, I I mean, it's a bit of a segue, but I have issues with the concept of hate speech because hate is subjective, and it essentially becomes the definition of what is hateful is the person who's in power at the time.
And critical race theory goes too far in that because they will actually say that hate speech it should be so criminalized that it's violence, and obviously I don't agree with that, and I don't think that you should go to jail for hate speech unless it incites something, unless it has actually incited something, because again. We cannot, as a free society, say you're allowed to express yourself in the way you want and then criminalize it. Can there be civil torts? Again, your feelings got hurt because somebody called you a bad name. But if it's bullying in the environment, then it is a civil tort because now the employer is not protecting you from somebody who's using that hate speech.
I think it's contextual as well. Like, I mean, just as a for instance, if you've got a performer on a stage at a concert and he's got tens of thousands of people in front of him, and he says, "Beat the living fuck out of people wearing yellow t-shirts," and all of a sudden the crowd turns around, who's drunk, on drugs, mobs a bunch of people in yellow t-shirts, and they beat the fuck out of them. That was a predictable outcome of what he said, because he knows that the people in front of them, from the perspective of their agency, are incapacitated to a degree.
And he would be arrested for that. Actually, is liability.
But if somebody just says beat up people wearing yellow t-shirts on the internet or as a tweet on Twitter, that's not. They're not having
the empowerment to do anything, right?
If that tweet convinced a person to go and beat up people in yellow t-shirts, then they didn't really need an excuse to go and beat up people in yellow t-shirts. They were going to do something batshit crazy anyway.
Yeah, I think contextualism applies very strongly when it comes to that, because again, random people saying stupid shit on the internet. Big difference between.
Also, I don't have a bigoted hatred of people wearing yellow t-shirts. It's not some gender neutral thing. So
I think you're repressing it. I think that you have an inherent bias against people in yellow t-shirts. I'm wearing black. Okay. So Siggy says for
that's even worse. You're a black supremacist.
Siggy says $5. Maybe you can extend this someday to gender roles, which also are a big part of the conversation. Yeah, but again, there might be a big part, but gender roles again. I hate to say it. I know Siggy would hate. Psychopath atheist would hate it, but it is a social construct. The male, it predominantly used to be the provider. The woman stayed home, took care of the kids, cooked, cleaned. That was the 50s, right? That was the nuclear family. Now, is that how it is now? No. And should it be? No. I mean, that's just how it was in the 50s. Doesn't make it right or wrong.
Unless you've got two people who want to conduct their lives that way, obviously.
And if they're traditionalists like that, more power to them. I'm a traditionalist in many ways, right? And I choose to be a traditionalist. And people that want to make me non-traditionalist, I think they're morally wrong for doing that.
I work in a building trade, and my wife is a nurse. I mean, I'm just on the cusp of living the trad life, so it's
good on you.
I'm not going to convict another person for doing it.
Yeah, like I said, if I'm a traditionalist and I want, like for example, like when I go on a date, I pay for it, right? But if she says no, I mean, I want a treat or I want to pay, that's fine too, right? But traditionally, I'm a traditionalist, but that doesn't mean I have to go. Oh no, I must pay, or I must open doors for you, which is whole different things. Because unfortunately, now opening doors for women is a microaggression. Although if you slam in their face, you're an asshole. We've already had that discussion. But anyways, somebody joined us, but I don't know who they are. So what was your name?
Higgy. Sorry.
Who's this?
Higgy.
Higgy. Oh, Higgy. You were trying to. So you got your computer fixed.
Yes, I did. Thankfully.
Do you know what's so funny? You talk about updates, but I had the same problem. I'll be like, oh, I need to do this, and all of a sudden I'll log on to like Skype to talk to somebody that I'm supposed to have a Skype conversation with, and I'm like updating forever. I have an update for my Windows that needs to be done.
Yeah, I opened it up and it was like, oh, quick little update. And
I got it right here. It's orange. It's quite. Do you have a Windows update? Because I have one as well.
Yep.
Yeah.
Sure did.
Yeah. All right. So
on my Surface, I had to go recover it using the BitLocker. It was absolute carnage.
Oh God! Oh, I just bought a Western Digital drive like this to back up my some of my stuff, because I just was running out of room and I wanted backup of stuff on my blog and my web pages and things of that nature. So that's my way.
It's amazing. I had a 1 terabyte mechanical optical drive in my. I've got a design PC. I built it years ago, and the mechanical drive started to fail. I remember where solid state drives, you had to sell a kidney to get one of those. I had the the 1 terabyte drive, which had like 700 gigabytes of data on it, imaged and replaced with a 1 terabyte solid state drive for £65. That's about $80.
That's cheap.
I couldn't believe it.
That's a hell of a buy. They used to be thousands.
I love the future.
I know.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, I mean, you can get 35 a gigabyte on a card this big, 128 gigabyte, 500 gigabyte on a card that big. I mean, think about the first hard drive for the IBM 360. The thing was the size of a.
It's been forklifted on the side of a plane. Right. Yeah.
Like 160 kilobytes of RAM.
People, the struggle is real. Look, if you're not old enough to remember a handset cord, then yeah.
Oh yeah.
But anyways,
my first PC was a Commodore Amiga 600.
I had a Commodore 64, a VIC 20, I had a TRS-80 994A, I had a Trash 80. I worked on a Tandy 2000. Yeah. But anyways,
had to load up Zool on 4 1.44 inch floppy disks.
We should have a computer remembrance stream. But Higgy, what do you got for us? What do you think of the stream, and what do you disagree and agree with?
Sorry, I pretty much agree with you guys. One thing I'd like to kind of add is going back to like the prison thing. If you've got people that they're transgender and they look, like I don't know if you're familiar with Laverne Cox, but they're trans actress. Yeah, right.
She's a great actress. Amazing actress.
Right, but if you could imagine somebody like that looks that way going into a male prison just because they have a penis, and that's the only deciding factor on that, I think that's a potentially dangerous place for them to be, because obviously they look like a woman. They're going to be one of the only woman presenting people in prison.
I think that's a good point. I think it's a case by case.
There's a lot of
yeah.
Well, what some of the rapiest places on the planet are male prisons.
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
No, I think that's,
so you put a biological female who identifies as a male in a male prison. That's just as scathing and just as indictable.
But Laverne Cox isn't a convicted rapist. That they're putting in a female prison.
This is what they've just changed in Scotland. It's not affected England or Wales, but in Scotland, because of this incident with this prisoner who was housed in the female prison, unseated the head of the Scottish National Party, who is the equivalent of our Prime Minister in Scotland. It fucked her politically because the Scottish people just did not tolerate it. It was an absolute car crash for her. She's done her mea culpas, and she said, "Oh no, it wasn't because of current political issues. I'm just exhausted. I can't, like the New Zealand, PM." Oh no, it's not because I'm fucking useless. It's because I'm exhausted and want to spend more time with family. She did that. But what they've changed their policy now is, even if a transgender person identifies as a female, they may still get put into the female prison. But if they have sexual convictions, they absolutely will not be.
And I think
so. They've introduced that
case by case. All right. Sure. So one other thing I want to show before I end this. This was a tweet by Andy Nago. Is I pronounce his last name? I don't follow him, but I know who he is. He has a show.
Yeah.
He did a tweet on Hannah Holzer, who did an article on the Sacramento Bee that falsely claimed that Charlie Clerk has a show. The Charlie Clerk Show, I think, is the name of the show. That he had called for the quote lynching of trans people, which is not what he said. They have subsequently removed that tweet and changed it, but this is one of my examples of far hyperbolic ramifications, because this one tweet saying that Charlie Kirk calls for the lynching of trans people caused an actual riot at UC Davis. People could have been killed.
Who put that tweet up?
This was Andy Nago.
I'm surprised at that. He's actually. I follow him. His reporting on Antifa is interesting.
Yeah, I've seen his report. I don't follow him, but he does report on Antifa. But Andy Nago called her out and said an opinion assistant editor for the Sacramento Bee, who is far left herself, helped incite a violent Antifa riot at UC Davis with a fake news piece that falsely said that Charlie Kirk called for the quote lynching of trans people. One of the tactics of the far left is to spread lies about a target they hope someone will read, become more radicalized, and take violent action. I'm speaking as a victim on the receiving end of that far left disinformation peddlers in Portland, assisted by the local biased press. I've seen this happen as well. I've had it happen in my own real life. that people will weaponize these things. They'll say things that you said that you didn't say. They'll take it to an extreme and then weaponize it. When you look, here's what kills me is there are people that are actually out there calling for the lynching of trans people and gay people and want the systematic elimination by the government killing them. Look at, again, Ken Hovind, Matt Powell, Steven Anderson, three of the most morally reprehensible people that if there is a hell, they're going to a special layer there. These people literally have said they want the government to kill gay people. Where's the outrage there? There really isn't. Why? Because we don't take them seriously and we mock them for it.
This extreme religious nutbaggery in every direction, I find insane. I mean, look, and you can't win either. You will find crazy examples in all directions. I mean, you've got Kent Hovind, who is advocating for the lynching of gay people, and I'm sure probably you can chuck transgender people in that route.
Oh yeah.
It's not like he's overburdened with nuance.
Ken Hovind is the equal opportunity bigot. Okay, let's get that out of the way, right?
I'm sure he'd probably throw his ex-wives into that too.
Oh yeah. They violated their covenant with God. They used to be executed.
Yeah,
Cindy Lincoln is suing him.
After the judge points at her bruises and Kent Hovind looks deadpan down the camera and no emotion, just goes, "She fell down the stairs
twice." she fell down and gravity just somehow magically reversed and she fell down again. I don't know how that happened.
Do you know structuring is a sin, Steve?
Yeah. my accountant said it was fine.
But it was the thing that amazed me is like you had some transgender activist groups. I think Stonewall actually said it in the UK, where they were holding up Iran as a shining example of transgender rights, and that's because obviously Iran is a totalitarian Islamist state, and the prohibition of being gay is in the Quran and the Hadiths, but there's no mention of transgenderism. So what they were doing is they were offering gay people who were caught engaged in the act of being gay, they were offering the right of, you can be hung by the neck from this crane over Tehran and we'll let the crows pick your corpse clean, or you can engage in transgender surgery because then you're a woman and it's not a sin anymore. It's fucking ridiculous.
Their sense of morality is so far out of...
Well, look, I can understand why Iran...
Wesley. Hang on. I have Wesley Curry, one of the most bigoted homophobes on the planet, and I didn't want this to get rancorous, and I didn't want to get this... But should I show the extreme of somebody who's such a religious nuttery? Well,
are you going to let him in, or just read a comment?
No, he's actually in the background right now.
Oh, is he?
Yeah. So I usually kick him out, but let me ask the live chat. Do you want
end it on a shit show?
I'm going to end it on a shit show. Do you guys? I said I wasn't. I said I wasn't, but all right. Let's end on a shit show. So Wesley L. Curry II, one of the most duplicitous, morally corrupt people that I know, who believes Jesus is basically telling people that gay people are wrong. Wesley, do you agree that what I just said, that you are morally duplicitous?
Well, every one of those words are yours, never spoken by me.
So gay people are fine in the eyes of God?
I actually scored a feature film that was an LGBTQ with Tom Arnold. It was the first gay film sanctioned by the Chicago Cubs.
That didn't answer the question. God's okay with gay people.
What was your question?
For the third time, God is okay with gay people.
Well, being gay is detestable, but it doesn't mean it's not forgivable.
Okay. Like I said, you have to ask questions.
Then?
You have to ask questions 3 times to get a straight answer from somebody's. I mean,
murder's detestable.
Murder's detestable.
So can I just ask? Can I just ask for clarification? Is that because you hold the religious position that if you come to God and accept Him as your Lord and Savior, that all sins are forgiven regardless of what the sin is, and all you have to do is accept God into your heart? Therefore, all sins are forgivable sins, and it doesn't really matter what they are.
Well, for a sin to be forgiven, you have to receive the forgiveness and not do the sin anymore. Otherwise, the forgiveness is vain.
But wouldn't that by definition be the point at which you ask forgiveness and come to God is the point at which you meet Him, and in heaven is a perfect place, so therefore by definition you can break God's...
Well, you need to see, imagining that the belief in an imagination forgiveness that oh, I'm forgiven and I can keep doing that over and over again is completely a satanic ritual.
Why do you need forgiveness to be gay? I mean, gay people that are born gay, that are attracted to the same sex, what do they need forgiveness for? What are they doing wrong? They're being who they are. And Siggy for $2 says dumpster fire mode on. Yeah, sorry, not sorry. It's the end of the show, so whatever. But I want to show people the extreme views that are out there. I mean, Wesley is an extreme viewpoint.
Sure. Well, my viewpoint is that the vision from Jesus is open, of a foot cut off that does not bleed, wearing a white sock and black shoe, of palm trees with orange red in the bottom, dark green leaves. Should you tell that vision, you won't need the Omni mark of the beast. If you don't tell it, you're going to be sucked into getting the $32,000 and be branded with a barcode on your right hand, wrist, or forehead. And then Jesus is going to say, "I do not know you." And
where do I
you're going to fall
where do
down
I
in
get
the
this
street.
$32,000 from?
Is that dollars?
It will be it'll be about 32,523. It will be electronic money only.
I'm down for this.
Bitcoin
No, electronic money.
After you get your personal account, a UPC barcode branded on your right hand wrist or your
Wesley's not
forehead.
mentally well. I usually don't take advantage of mentally unwell people, but
it'll be called
we have a brand when we have like microscopic.
It's not going to be a happy time for you.
He comes in.
You're going to be taking off your. You're going to be brought down off of your silly little high chair.
He comes in my live shows. He starts spewing the most nonsensical rhetoric. And again, I have a version.
I can't tell if it's a grift for some sort of like Bitcoin digital currency thing. Or...
No,
I'm just curious.
I think he's actually just mentally unwell.
That the vision you were saying, that was really specific. Where did you get the wording from that?
Well, I'm not the only one that had the vision. The one with the orange red in the lower dark green palm leaves on the right, the straight trees on the left with the bright green leaves on top, the curved river in the middle, the full moon in the sky, the bronze aura, the starless night. Jesus Christ.
So you had a vision of Hawaii.
It is inside of you in the Holy Spirit of Jesus, which would look to your eyes like a very large pearl in your bowels or in your belly area of your soul.
Sounds like
that's the vision.
It sounds
that's
like it should with the accoutrement commandments of watch out for falling coconuts and beware of the rip current on the beach.
Yeah.
To be honest with you.
Did this come from the Bible?
Jesus never said, "Don't tell the vision." Jesus never said, "Sad and delicious," and Jesus never said, "I will turn and toss you violently like a ball."
So you had a vision of a beach, and you think that was from Jesus?
I never said what you said. There was a square pit. There was sand under the grass. The meaning of the sand is, what shall it profit a man should he gain the whole world and lose his own soul? Or what can a man give in exchange for his soul? The meaning of the foot not bleeding is that I failed Jesus by not believing in his forgiveness. The meaning of the two creatures is that I failed Jesus being double-minded and double-hearted and double-tongued. They were very short creatures in very nice clothes with brass buckles on their shoes.
Let me bring it full circle because you can just ramble. When it comes to transgenderism, we'll leave it on that note because I do got to get going here. What's your view on transgender people? What do you think? One, do you think that people actually experience gender dysphoria? And two, what do you think biblically should happen to them or spiritually should happen to them?
Well, it's detestable. It's pleasure seeking. It's people seeking pleasure.
So people that are just people that are experiencing gender dysphoria, that are depressed, that have psychological issues that are affecting their real life. They're doing that for their own pleasure because that doesn't make much sense.
Yeah,
that's antithetical. That's antithetical to their own pleasure.
I don't think psychological levity is the equivalent to seeking psychological pleasure.
Yeah.
They're two very different things. Somebody trying to find some sort of semblance of balance and comfort in their life isn't pleasure.
I am not a psychiatrist.
Clearly,
yeah. You're not anything.
Neither am I.
You have no background in anything, correct?
I was the musical director for the Second City in Chicago.
Music, that's right.
And used to be an exhibit designer.
Yeah, I remember he said music last time he came on.
Yeah. I score films.
Yeah.
So I'm an architect. My qualifications have nothing to do with psychology either.
Jesus showed you what he's going to do to all that take the Omni mark, whether they're transgender or whether they're gay or whether they claim they're a minister of Jesus Christ. And
if I get 32,000, yeah, I'm okay with that.
Many of them shall be saying Jesus, 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 and they're going to take that Omni, the mark of the beast. So they do not believe Jesus is God. So they believe they are God over Jesus.
So you believe that they're condemned, which you have a right to believe, but you don't advocate.
They shall be, not yet.
Oh, okay.
But the condemning begins when the wheel in the wheel, the color of barrel, a green Volvo in Chicago, makes a fire unfolding in itself, a nuclear detonation.
If they're not condemned yet, but they absolutely will be condemned. So because
when they do a sin, I don't have to get back at them. When they do something that's against Jesus, it turns a part of their soul into a flake of dead ash. They're only harming themselves. If that's what they're going to do, I can't stop them. They're not harming me. If they're going to do those kind of activities, the wages of sin is death. Every time they do it, another part of their soul becomes another flake of dead, powerless, cowardice.
I will leave you with this. First, is Higgy, thanks for jumping on. John, always a pleasure. And I'm going to be leaving the
if I may say one thing, don't forget, masturbation is homosexuality. So before I start condemning somebody for being queer, I better look at myself.
All right, that's a weird way to end the show.
That's a weird one.
Yeah, I think it's more if Wesley, if you masturbate and you're thinking of me, yeah, that's a little gay.
It's not something I want to promote, but I couldn't deny that I've done it, and it's homosexual. Before I start judging somebody for being gay, I better clean my own house.
If you want to get off to me rather than John, I'm gonna take that as a compliment. Okay, no offense to John.
I'm just trying to level the playing field and put a little sobriety into the reality.
No, what about me?
Yeah, I know. But I'm starting to feel left out.
He's got the accent. All he has to do is talk. If you want to wink to that, knock yourself out.
I seriously doubt that anybody out there gay bashing is not at home watching a porn, jacking off, committing a homosexual act.
Anyways, like I said, I'm going to be ending this. I'm going to leave you guys with this as I leave the StreamYards.
All right.
Wesley,
thanks for letting me on.
Yeah, sure. Wesley's Jesus doesn't exist. His version of God doesn't exist. I may be an agnostic when it comes to the metaphysical understanding of some intelligence that might have, created everything. But the version he advocates for, I will tell you right now, does not exist. I believe it does not exist. I am a local atheist to that type of reprehensible God. His God is an evil God. His God is a non-benevolent deity. His God that he calls, a God is what most normal religious people would probably call Satan. So if he's talking about Satanism, he's much more of a Satanist than people I know that are actual Satanists, because that's some whacked up shit. Okay.
Satan's pretty cool in the Bible. It's not too bad.
We'll watch my last show on Satanism. It was really good, actually. Did you watch my last episode? Yeah, go watch my last episode. It was on Satanism. It was really good. But I do got to get going, guys. Thanks for joining us.
Well, just thanks very much for having me again, Steve. It was
always a pleasure.
It was a good chat. I enjoyed it.
It was.
So, thank you.
All right, so I'm going to leave this, and I'm going to wrap this up. Guys, thanks for watching. I think this was a very good experience as far as like 2.5 hours of having civil dialogue until the very end to show you how extremists can come in and just, totally try to derail a conversation. Now, granted, he was talking about something else to derail, but I think the point still stands that when you have people that want to have their own echo chambers, they're not wanting to go to anywhere else where that allows for free dialogue and allows for topics of this nature to be discussed. We only had two out of all the live chatters come in and, have negative things to say. I said I wasn't going to allow negativity or rhetoric, but I allowed a little bit just to show that some people still will do it, but they left on their own accord. But I would have invited them in for have a conversation, but they chose not to. This channel is dedicated to having, opposing views, and non-popular views, or at least discussing non-popular views. You don't have to hold those views, but it was predicated on not having echo chambers. So I think that we actually proved that tonight. And oh my goodness, I've got to go over my allergies. I'm going to take my pill, and I'm going to get some rest. So with that, guys, thanks for watching, and we'll see you later on the Non Sequitur Show.